What was the best moment you've seen where the real world hit a spoiled rich kid? For a couple of years in high school I went to this super expensive American private school in Switzerland. The company my dad worked for paid for almost all the tuition, so it was an amazing opportunity for me. Most of the kids in this school were either State Department or from American families living in Saudi. Saudi provided expat kids with school up until 10th grade, so you had to go to a school abroad to finish HS. There were, however, a few Saudi kids that were there, mostly so that they would be able to speak flawless English to help out their future careers. One of these kids, who I will call the prince, was somewhere in the line of Saudi succession, but honestly, he was like 1455th in line for the throne. Not a real contender for king, but his family was rich. Like rich in a way that most of us can't even imagine. This school had some rules, like you couldn't have a car as a student, even if you were old enough to get a license. Switzerland. This rule was a real buzzkill for the prince, but he made it through the year somehow. Over the summer after his junior year, he drove back to the school from Geneva in his Lambo, probably just because he could do it outside the school year. On his way up the mountain, the road is like a endless series of hairpin turns. He managed to flip his Lambo into vineyard while trying to navigate one of those hairpin turns. I'm guessing a Lambo has a lot of power, and he took it to hardpoint his parents, furious at what he had done, decided to punish him by replacing his Lamborghini with a Porsche, and the prince was so angry, he complained about it bitterly when the school year started up again. The rest of us kind of just looked at each other in amazement. Same planet, different worlds I guess. This is not the best, as it's pretty sad and frankly undeserved, but a good example of the question asked point. I went to a very expensive private elementary school. A friend of mine grew up very wealthy, her father a surgeon and mother a stay-at-home wife. They were very controlling of her and quite honestly, a little scary. They sheltered her to the extreme, and she frequently repeated insane things they said verbatim, because that was all she knew. If she was told to clean her room, but left an item out upon her parents' inspection, they would throw the item out, no matter what it was. Once it was something very sentimental to her, can't remember what it was, and when she told me, and I expressed sympathy, she said something like, "Oh no, it's okay, it's my fault." If I told my children to clean their rooms, but they didn't, and had their friends come over, their friends would go home and tell their parents about how much of a slob my family is, and that can't happen. This was her concern at 10 years old. When it came time for college, they sent her to an expensive hard to get into school and told her that her sole purpose there was to find a husband, specifically a doctor or an engineer, to keep her as a stay-at-home wife. She flat out told me this was her only purpose, which broke my heart, because she is a smart person who was able to get into said school to begin with, and her parents should have been encouraging different goals for her. Well, she found a boyfriend, but at the end of her 4 years of undergrad, he turned out to be a cheating narcissistic douchebag. The narcissistic douchebag part was obvious to me from the get-go, but she had no idea what a healthy relationship looked like. However, the cheating was obvious enough to be a deal breaker. So instead of going straight to marriage, which disappointed her parents and they kicked her out of the house, she suddenly had to become solely independent, find a job and an apartment, and is doing well for herself. She's a totally different person now, and has come a really long way. Tears of disbelief when seeing poverty for the first time. The first day my mission team drove into Tijuana, Mexico. We were high school students and had spent the first few days in LA prepping, and most of the team still had this idea that we would spend 5 days in a poor area, save everyone and then go home with something amazing for our college applications. Krista was this beach whose parents were wealthy. All the parties were at her house, since they had a pool. Her mom used to buy her 6 or 7 prom dresses and then return the ones she didn't like, because it was easier than shopping, and she was a two-faced witch. So we are crammed into this passenger van and the border crossing into Mexico is fine, but as soon as we get to our neighborhood and Krista sees scrap wood with tarps which make up the homes, and children playing half naked in streets made of dirt. When she realizes that the water coming down from the single bathroom isn't water, when a child happily hands her a gift, His favorite rock. She just completely broke down into tears and disbelief because her entire life had been sheltered from the reality of anything but the rich and spoiled. I wish I could say it changed her into a better person, but she remained a spoiled and self-centered bitch until I purposefully lost touch with her family. The real world can hit a rich kid, but they can ignore the pain if they just focus hard enough on the car daddy promised to buy them. It was more surprising that someone could be so out of touch than anything. My boyfriend's roommate is 19 and runs a very successful online business, lives in LA, buys new clothes, including $2,500 sneakers, without a second thought, and despite growing up without much money, is very out of touch. I was sick while visiting, and he told me to visit the doctor. I don't have great insurance, and was already juggling other bills, so I told him I couldn't afford it with how much I get paid at my part-time convenience store job. He asked how much I got paid. $9.80 an hour. I get paid a little under $200 every 2 weeks. He was so taken aback. This man was so surprised that I was working miles off with school, a job, and an internship and still lived on about $100 a week. He still bothered me about going to the doctor, but offered to help me out if I needed it. The worst part is $9.80 is pretty good for a job at the university I attend. I was really happy with the pay. Edit. I don't live in LA and $9.80 is well above minimum wage in my state. I live in dorms and scholarships cover that, so $100 a week is groceries and incidentals. Not great, but definitely livable. Thanks to everyone who was concerned though. My wife was evicted from her dorm in college, dropped from her classes for non-payment, and had her car repossessed. Her dad was a CEO of a fairly large company and had an income north of $1 million per year in the late 90s. The company was being bought out, and the board members all stood to make a ton of faking money each. They did background checks on everyone and found out that her dad lied about his experience and education. He did not have an MBA from Stanford. He did not have any college. He did not play in the NFL. He was not a decorated war hero. So they fired his ass so they could split a slice of the pie out amongst themselves. He never told his wife or daughter. He continued to run up debt and live the same lifestyle while being unemployed. He forged my mother-in-law's name on all sorts of loan and credit applications. Then, one day, he left them high and dry for a wealthy woman he had been having an affair with. He filed bankruptcy and managed, somehow, to get away pretty clean, while leaving most of the sheet in my mother-in-law's lap. My wife was completely ignorant of everything going on, and her father said he was still paying for everything. Her world came apart, and he ghosted her for years. She gathered her composure and enrolled in community college. That is where we met. I taught her how to live a pretty decent life as a poor person. I had tons of experience being poor. Nearly 2 decades later, we are both making good money and have a family of our own. She learned a lot from that experience and has even reconciled with her dad. We keep him at an arm's length since he is a narcissist and a pathological liar, but at least she has a relationship with her father. I had a brother-in-law, now gone due to his divorce. His parents were wealthy, from the dad's dad. So, grandpa was the original maker of the money. Anyhow, the bro-in-law was a lazy piece of shit with a weak handshake and no ambition, except to put an hour or 2 per week into his own work and act as if that was enough, while his mom and dad funded his passions and his house and his car, etc. Keep in mind, this guy is 40 something at the time and has a prestigious law degree, which he does not use. He has no savings, no property, can't hammer a nail, and would probably drown in heavy rain. So, his mom and dad got the idea to open a big business using grandpa's money, which they had inherited. They put about $15 million into it to create it from scratch, which I believe 80-90% of their entire nugget. It went belly up within 6 months. They lost it all to the banks now. I have nothing against his mom and dad, except for the fact that, when we all got together, they relentlessly bragged about the Ivy League educations of their children. Okay, I take it back. They were pretentious AF. However, when they lost their ass, and the bro-in-law started to experience debt and living by credit card, he freaked out. He said, "I never realized how hard it is to get money," which I thought was an odd way to phrase it. Get money. instead of an money point, yet he did nothing for a long time. He moved debt around from credit card to credit card point now. He has moved off and is practicing law. So at least he is, theoretically, not a parasite anymore, although he is a lawyer. Edit. I would say what the business was, but it might give too much away. Suffice it to say there was ample time and opportunity to test market the idea, rather than launching it whole and hoping. All throughout high school, for alphabetical reasons, my locker was right next to the son of the owner of a 200-store chain of convenience stores in our region. He was incredibly socially inept. I felt bad for him. We developed kind of a weird little friendship where we only ever talked at our lockers, but we had these little 2-minute deep conversations. Mostly focused on him getting bullied and me advising him to just chill out and stop running his mouth so much, because that was why it was happening. He was obnoxious to classmates and teachers alike, and he reveled in it. He'd brag about his family's money and just generally play the part of a spoiled rich kid, almost like he felt like he had to. He liked being hated/envied to some extent, but he also hated being an outcast. He did listen when I told him about the stuff that was bothering me. I was shy and felt ignored and excluded all the time. There was absolutely a kernel of a good human being in him. He was actually an important person to me in a way. I never told anyone else about that stuff back then. His behavior came back to bite him the week after the Columbine massacre. He decided to purchase and wear a black trench coat to school in the style of the school shooters. After a few days of him wearing that throughout the day, just to be a dick, he got cornered by some kids and absolutely pummeled. They broke his nose. He was faked up. He'd been basically asking for it, so I'm not sure what he expected. I was walking to my car, wondering why my dad was being such a prick and wouldn't give me money to go have fun point, and as I was walking, in my clothes which my dad bought for me, wearing my one-a-day contacts that my dad buys every 6 months, I looked at my $14,000 car that I don't pay insurance or maintenance or even gas for, and as I got in, looking at my $300 phone, my life, my privilege, I realized I had become a spoiled prick. All these possessions, and still in my head I was making my dad out to be the enemy point. I thought about all the money my dad had invested into my future. He gives and works and toils, and if he could read my mind, he would cry, because all I had were bad thoughts about how shitty my dad was for not giving me what I want. He didn't have to read my mind though, to see me walk in the house every day, pass him by on the sofa without even a glance, and lock myself in my room. How could it have come to this? I felt truly humbled that day. I went back to the house and gave my dad a big hug, and then we spent the rest of the day watching TV. What he wanted all along, my company, I could finally give to him without my mind being in another room. After that day I made an effort to never think bad thoughts about my dad again, and I made an effort to treat him like a friend and not an inconvenience of my life. That was back when I was 19. Now at 25, I just hope I've redeemed myself. I have a story that's a bit different than what I've read here so far. It's about a spoiled, self-proclaimed rich kid I knew from the dorms my freshman year who went to college and was hit with the realization that, while his family may have been seen as wealthy in his poor hometown, he was barely even considered above middle class compared to the people here. Note that I went to a public school on scholarship, so we are not talking about some $70k/year private school here. This guy was just the perfect mix of clueless/delusional and being cocky. This happened a while ago, so I'm a bit fuzzy on the details. I also never had more than a few conversations with the guy and never saw him outside freshman year. But anyways, to make a long story short, rich kid comes from a pretty small town a few hours away from campus that is pretty much known as a pretty poor, mostly industrial and agricultural town. His family, I assume, was considered wealthy by town standards, but was probably just marginally upper middle class at best in the real world. While most of the freshmen, myself included, are busy trying to make friends and adjust to college life, he's busy humble bragging to anyone who will listen about his family's wealth. We are maybe 3 or 4 days into classes and he's doing his usual routine of striking up a typical freshman dorms conversation. What's your name? Where are you from? What are you studying? etc. solely as an opportunity to brag about how rich his family is. In other words, acting like a complete and utter condescending snob a week into freshman year, while everyone's just trying to make friends. He stumbles across some actual extremely wealthy kids, the multiple expensive vacation homes, and full-time staff at their mansion kind of rich, and tries pulling this on them by one-upping them at every turn in their conversation. It takes less than 2 minutes for them to realize he's either delusional or a complete fraud, and they pretty much start tearing into him for everything. For bragging about being rich when he came from one of the poorest towns in the state, for acting like some privileged snob and looking down on other people when he's an in-state student attending a public school of all places, asking him why he's wearing $15 button-up shirts from Kohl's and $20 jeans if he's as rich as he claims he's etc. The kicker at the end is the rich kid tries mentioning his dad's job at a large pharmaceutical company as a final bragging point, while saying he probably made way more than their fathers. Note, this would be a job that would probably pay something like $150,000 in salary. Definitely not bad, but definitely not rich. One of the other guys nearly collapses a lung laughing at him because his own dad recently stepped down / retired as one of the senior VPs of the same company. Estimates of his yearly compensation without considering whatever bonuses or packages he got when he stepped down were $5 million a year. In short, the rich kid finds out about the meaning of the big fish in a small pond analogy the hard way and is pretty much the but of my parents are so rich jokes the rest of the year. He manages to pretty much alienate an entire floor of freshmen less than a week into college and is publicly humiliated by actual rich kids who ended up being complete assholes. By the way, they are not exactly the heroes of this story. All because he decided to go into college bragging about the same shit he probably got away with in his small town in high school. My mom was the doctor of one of the cleaning ladies at one rich girl from my school's house point on a Saturday. This girl threw a big party at her house while her parents were away. The other rich kids and the cool kids were invited. I was not. It was during X-Project movie popularity, and she promised that the party would be decadent. On Sunday, photos started to appear on Facebook. Everyone was drunk. Everyone was kissing everyone. Preservatives were thrown on the lawn. You could see a lot of vomit and broken things on the background. Some kid decided to cook noodles in the jacuzzi and broke it by emptying every pack of ramen noodle in it. A big mess. The girl replied to every picture with a yeah good luck to the maids point on Monday. She went back to school and instead of being her cocky self, she was real quiet and went home immediately after class without saying anything. When my mom went home this night, she told me she had a great story for me about this girl. Remember her awful comment about the maids? I don't know how to express it in English, but the term she used in French was very condescending. Well, the cleaning lady came to the house for her usual shift on Sunday morning and saw the mess. Rich girl barely wakes up from her hangover and tells her to clean it. Cleaning lady refuses, and rich girl says if you don't, my parents will fire you. So cleaning lady takes very detailed pictures of the house and send them to the girl's parents. 10 minutes later, rich girl's phone is ringing and her parents yell at her that she is a disgrace and needs to clean everything and that she won't have money, cell phone, and computer until the end of high school, 1 year 1/2. They also apologize profusely to the cleaning lady. So she's crying and asks the cleaning lady to help her because she can't do it. She refuses and leave, letting rich girl clean everything by herself. She then told my mother that the parents came to her flat during the evening, apologizing again, calling their daughter an ungrateful brat, and gave her a raise immediately. Apparently, the jacuzzi was unusable for 4 months. Note, didn't use any real names. There's a kid I went to school with, Saul, who has parents in politics. At one point his father was a senator. His family was super rich, but they also extended fully loaded bank accounts to their kids to spend money for whatever, so he was always super cocky. He got along well with guys, didn't try to buy friends or anything, but Saul treated women so poorly. He referred to girls as such objects and generally talked down to them. He did not respect relationships between other people and considered them doomed to fail at any moment. Enter Alan, my friend who got a very serious girlfriend in high school. Saul was determined to ruin their relationship by wooing this girl with his money and status. The girl seemingly let him win her over, but in reality she was in it with her current boyfriend to get as much of his money as possible. She made him think she was cheating on her boyfriend with him, and this really got Saul off. He never actually slept with her, and at most he got a kiss on the cheek. After 3 months of going on lavish dates to insanely expensive restaurants, doing luxury activities, and also buying gifts for her, Saul starts telling her she has to leave my other friend and be with him. Saul now wants to have sex with this girl and outright tells her that's what he wants. Girl tells him to buy her a car and she'll dump Alan. Now in the real world this would never be possible, but since Saul has a maximum out bank account and access to funds in his name, he takes this girl to a BMW dealership and buys her a car. They end up putting the title in her name and he gifts it to her within the next week. This girl skips town entirely and my friends and I never saw her again. We have no idea if she went and sold the car or drove away with it and moved somewhere else. She even left her boyfriend. Saul ended up thinking this would be a small consequence at first, but when his parents found out what happened they pulled everything. They went from fully spoiling to disowning this kid. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but Saul spent some time homeless after he finished college. Biggest dose of reality imaginable. I think he's working in sales now and has a decent life. He moved out of state, so all I ever see about him is through social media. Oh man, this is my question. Between marrying into a wealthy family and being employed at a manufacturer that hires 18-year-olds, I've got plenty of these to share. Sister-in-law didn't file income taxes for 3 years, thought that people only did that for the refund. Since she didn't need the money, she didn't file. Brother-in-law spent 4 years at Stanford. Freaking Stanford. Received a bachelor's in Latin American studies. It's been almost a year and he not only doesn't have a job, but doesn't even know where to look for one where his degree applies, and won't listen to advice about it either. Co-worker. This was his second job, his first being a position at his father's company. I told him to make sure he comes back from his 10-minute break on time, since he's new. People would be paying attention to his times. His response was, I got 15-minute breaks at my old job. He was fired the next week for constantly coming back late. Other coworker. First job, only working there because parents are tired of him lounging around the house. If he wants to continue being part of the trust, he's got to work. Saw him on his phone, strict no phone policy, and walked over to him to tell him that if I'm 100 feet away and can see him, then anyone walking by can see him. Cut it out. Nope. Apparently his supervisor tried to reason with him too, but still, nope. What can you do? He's a good worker, so you want to try to resolve this. Solution? No idle time. Now he gets to do the work of 2 people instead of coasting by while appeasing the family. I could type these all day. Not spoiled by any means, but a best friend of mine, extremely down to earth, a family of millionaires. Suddenly had all his dad's years of hard work and struggles taken away the day his grandfather was on his deathbed, and named all his father's companies to his uncles. I've seen firsthand at how much his father worked throughout our time in middle school together, through high school and so on. Every time I used to visit his place, his father had top executives at his house discussing business stuff, advising, etc. He catapulted everything from one company. AMD turned it into a conglomerate of sorts. My friend's uncles though, who merely ran comparatively smaller businesses that my friend's father had helped them set up throughout the years, were doing decent work with it, but couldn't compare themselves to what his father had actually built up over the years. Anyway, everything took a turn for the worse when his grandfather signed the will and gave everything away. And by everything, I mean the companies his father built up through decades and even all his properties, the lavish houses worth acres, all given away within mere hours. My friend's whole family, which included 5 other siblings, were to vacate their properties with immediate effect and were told to go back to the village they all originated from. They spent years living there, under some of the worst circumstances imaginable. His father tried his best to start off things from scratch, but it all didn't go too well as they thought. His father went into depression and was given bed rest for a while. They visited our city once after years. We hadn't been in touch because they couldn't afford cell phones back in those times. He called me up from a payphone the day he landed, and I left work midday just to spend some time with him. We met up at a club and one could immediately tell how bad things were by his get-up. I comforted him and ensured he didn't lose any hope and insisted that we take me to his rented place so I could meet his family after all these years. My heart sank and I literally held back tears when I entered his place and saw nothing but mattresses lying on the floor. Meantime, his mother walked in, all smiles as always, trying her best to hide back those tears, and offered me something to eat. I comforted her and my friend's father. He shook my hand and all of a sudden, he couldn't hold back and started apologizing to me for the way I was being welcomed by them. As I held my tears back, I told him it's okay and he didn't have to worry about all this, and I sat down right beside him and I managed to change the subject altogether. His mother started talking about video games. A little side note on my friend's mother, she was an avid gamer, played almost every game they got their hands on back in the good days. Every family member owned a PS1 and had the biggest library of games I had ever seen. She often used to test my skills every time we went at it on Tekken. She was actually pretty good. Anyhow, we started talking games, and I told her about all these new releases that I can't remember, and that is when it hit me. Since I was working in a friend's office, I borrowed one of the spare television sets at work, brought in my PS1, and gave her all the games I had. I couldn't recall the last time I had seen her this happy. She was ecstatic. She immediately plugged in, and they all started going at it one by one. They stayed for about 12 days in the city before they had to leave, and I told his mother she could keep my PS1 to keep herself busy whenever she felt down. Years went by, his uncles never contacted them, they kept going on with their lives, destroyed all the businesses that were given, and eventually filed for bankruptcy about 3 years ago. Fast forward to today, after another struggle that went on for years, to come after I met my friend and his family here, today they stand on their own feet once again. Having went into the real estate industry and are regarded as some of the most trustworthy and well-reputed people in their line of work. I'm yet to meet his family because they've moved to a different city, and with projects going on in various cities at once, my friend often drops by and we meet up, talk about all the times he has seen, and I'm just sitting there beaming with pride on his and his family's accomplishments after a struggle that people literally give up on. His family never did. His younger siblings, now all grown up, help run the real estate firm and are now just as invested in their business as their father had hoped for. Back on track and living the best time of their lives yet again. My friend's getting married in a couple of months too, and I'm excited as hell to meet everyone all over again in these times and cherish every moment. Specifically, I'm really looking forward to talking games with his mother, who he still says is playing on the daily. A kid at my school was particularly well off and a real sociopath. He would invite people to his massive house, then have them either hit his sister or watch him do it, then brag about it at school. He told more than one person he'd forced her to have sex with him, and another boy from the school who had taken pictures on those brick/PDA phones we used to have as kids. He would use his money even as a young teen to pay people to do stupid things like slap another kid for no reason or run into walls and hurt themselves relatively badly. One day he brought in drugs to sell and a boy overdosed at school and basically got away with it when his dad made a huge donation to the school. In the last year of school a few of us had had enough, and the kid who overdosed, under duress we found out at that point, hatched a plan. He told the sociopath he wanted to buy 4 figures worth of drugs and set the thing up. Sociopath comes in with a literal briefcase of pills and police did a "random search" that day. He got caught with a ridiculous amount, and on his way out being literally dragged he yells about how he will pay or have his dad pay to make it go away, like a one-ape gangster. One of the policemen shouted something like "nothing will make this go away," and the sociopath ended up in juvenile prison for 6 months, then the rest of his sentence in adult prison. We heard from a reliable source that he did not have a good time, especially being a vaguely effeminate looking guy. It was brilliant. when my family and I traveled to my mom's home country, which is the Philippines. She is the first in her family to come to America. Now I wouldn't say I'm spoiled rich kid, but when I was little I never really wanted for anything. I got to be picky with food, the clothes I wanted, the stuff I wanted, if I complained about it enough. And every time my mom would say, when I was your age, but I was little so this meant what to me. But, when we took a 2-week vacation to the Philippines, when I was 15, 2-ish years ago, 1 week to visit family in Manila, the other to a resort on one of the islands. I wasn't completely oblivious. I knew I was extremely lucky with being in a lower/middle class family, but when I saw how my cousins lived, damn, that really opened my eyes. When they came to the hotel we were staying at, it was the first they saw a pool. It was in the upper class of Manila where all the skyscrapers are. This was one of the many slap across the face moments I had for the first week. The other more prominent ones being seeing their bedroom, which was single bedroom with like 4 beds and 1 window account unit, seeing the neighborhood they lived in for the first time, and the dinner we had while we there. But, how they live, that's probably middle class for the Philippines. The gap between the middle class and the upper class is absolutely terrifying. Their point, man. After that week I felt like I was the luckiest kid in the whole wide world. Sadly, I don't think it hit my brother in the same way. He broke his phone a few months after, and I think it was newest/previous generation of iPhone that we got the spring before the vacation. Worked at a summer camp way up in the mountains in my youth. That was a hit by a massive stomach bug. Everyone was throwing up. I was laid up in the infirmary on an unrelated issue when the camp owner's grandson came in with the stomach bug, throwing up every 15 minutes. This made me happy to no end, as he was a little sheet of a devil who was nearly untouchable due to his grandparents. The kid routinely got away with murder and treated everyone like utter shit, and no one could do anything about it. After a couple hours of vomiting and not being able to keep the oral anti-nausea meds down, the camp nurse finally came in with a rectal suppository to give him. She walked into the room and was like, "Well, you aren't keeping the other meds down, so we are going to have changed tactics," and held up the suppository. Not knowing what it was, he looked at her, screwed his eyes and yelled, "You stupid faking cow, if I can't keep the other meds down, how am I supposed to keep that faking horse pill down too?" Having enough of his shit, she just smiled and said, "Oh, no child, this doesn't go in your mouth." And I visibly saw what little color he had left in him drain from his face. He gulped and asked meekly then, "Where does it go?" The camp nurse smiled at him and beckoned for him to follow her into the bathroom. He came back, white as a ghost and silent as a mouse, and stayed that way for the rest of the night. We all looked at each other with the biggest grins on our faces, knowing that little Pose finally got what was coming to him. I was the principal of a public junior high school that had a lot of wealthy students. The attendance zone was so wealthy only 2 staff members out of over 100 lived in the zone. We had a bullying incident where a girl opened her locker and found a can of dog food and a dog collar in it, with a note that read, "The only way you'll get a date is on a leash." This occurred on a Friday afternoon, and by 3 PM I had informed her very upset parents and caught one of the 2 boys involved. The boy told me that another boy helped him, but the bell rang and school got out. I didn't want it to fester over the weekend, so I called the other boy's parents and asked if I could stop by and see the family. I knew I had a very short window, as the boy already in trouble would alert the other one. But he had gone home with his parents and I knew I had maybe 2 hours. I went over and the mother greeted me and brought me inside a stunning home. We sat down and I told her what had occurred. She defended her son, who walked in about halfway through it and didn't think her son was involved. She then asked me if I wanted a glass of lemonade. I said sure. The mother got up to go get it. I turned to the boy and said, "Your buddy gave you up. He was in my office 30 minutes ago and he got taken home by his parents." The boy's world fell apart and I told him, "Look, just tell your mom the truth when she comes back in. Time to own it and grow up a bit." To his credit, he did just that. His mother absolutely mortified. I told them thanks and took my leave, scheduling an appointment back in my office for Monday morning. I'm sure the boy had a rough weekend, but again, to his credit, he owned it, and I really never had another issue with him the rest of the time he was at my school. Sad thing is, this kid wasn't even rich. He pretended to be. He drove a caddy and called it that, went to all the trendy clubs and posted about it, literally using the words pop in bottles, got spray tans, lots of tattoos, trips to Miami, where he has one of his bros take pics of him and all of his tattoos flexing by the pool. Point: I used to smoke weed with this kid in high school in the early 90s, back when he was normal. We happened to have the same tattoo artist. I was getting my sleeve done about 7 years ago, and my tattoo guy happened to bring up the fact that the dude owed him a ton of money for tattoos, because my tattoo artist trusted that he'd pay him. We got to talking about him, and he said that he went into crazy debt from his car and all his maximum credit cards putting up this facade. His parents ended up having to pay for his debt and help him catch up on his mortgage at his condo so he wouldn't lose it. Years ago, when I was still on Facebook, he posted a status that was putting down people from his hometown, where he still lived, but pretended online like he didn't, and I had had it by that point. I called him out and brought up the fact that his parents had to bail him out financially and that he still lived in the hometown he was talking about. I ended it with "have fun in the tanning booth." He mustn't have checked his Facebook for a while, because a lot of people saw my comment. People who weren't even on Facebook came up to me weeks/months later and told me how they heard about my epic call out of the dude. They all loved it because he used to be their friend too. Best part about it, dude's name is Chad. I shit you not. I swear he's where that stereotype came from. I don't think it's right to think of it as a moment for a rich kid or a poor kid as to when they hit the real world. It's not right for anyone to take joy in anyone else's pain. I remember when things were going good for me, I was able to give my brother a car, a refrigerator and money. He took it willingly and kept in contact with me. But as soon as things started going bad for me, he stopped all contact, said bad things about me behind my back, and did everything he could to kick me further into the ground. Why? Because I had nothing more to give him. Yet he never gave me anything. Just because some people don't always succeed like they thought they would isn't a license for others to kick them when they're down. That's what narcissists do. That's why a truly rich person knows how to enrich their lives and the lives of those around them. Believe it or not, with very little money, because they use their talents to make their life beautiful and blessed. But a poor person can't live their life any other way except poor, because they know no other way. Sure, they'll spend thousands weekly, but still look and act poor. That's why there's so many hoarders everywhere. If you're one of first, you'll understand what I'm saying. If you're the second sort of person, you won't understand at all what I'm trying to say. My best friend is super spoiled. She really doesn't ask for anything. It's like her mom does it to make her look better than other people. By the time we were 18, she had already had 4 cars. 2 she wrecked. 1 she just refused to drive because it was a little older than she wanted. When she hit 20, her mom offered to move her to Burbank, California if she agreed to model. So she did, even though she wanted to, and saw it as a chance to get away from her mom. She got a 2-bedroom apartment next to Universal Studios, a brand new car, and monthly spending money. When she left LA, because she hated the industry, she came home, and her mom paraded her model daughter around. She got married at 25. Her family wasn't happy about it, and they divorced a few years later. Her award, a brand new Mitsubishi Eclipse GTS. When she was 30, she decided to go back to school. Her mom bought her a new car again. Mind you, she never asked for any of this, and knew that her mom did it to keep some aspect of control over her. When she was done with school and was laid off and couldn't afford her rent, she bought her a condo. She got a new job pretty soon after, but the company closed a few months later. So guess what? Mom bought her a car again. She was struggling with some depression and noticed she was drinking too much. So she decided to enter treatment and stop drinking. When her mom found out that she was in treatment, she cut her off completely. Took the car, took the condo, and told her when she was out of treatment she had to find somewhere else to live and get her own car. It was kinda sad. This is the only time I saw her ask her mom for anything, and it wasn't even monetary. It was to get healthy and happy. She just went on, cut her mom out, and started living a sober, happy life. Once her mom saw she was doing really well, she took complete credit for it. told everyone on Facebook that she got her daughter out of a deep dark place and now she's doing wonderful. My friend was done. Commented on her page, "You are right, you did help. When I asked for your emotional support, you cut me off. It helped me to stand on my 2 feet, realize I can do anything on my own, and it doesn't matter where I live, what I drive, what matters is that I'm happy and healthy." Her mom's ego was busted. Didn't go over well. But her mom did manipulate her way back in. Gave her a new condo and car. She did tell her mom she would take them, but only if they were put in her name completely. She actually did it. So, yeah, a different life. Entitled for sure, not necessarily happy, until now. This girl I used to be friends with decided to go on a trip for spring break, using her parents' money of course. She was traveling with a Chinese passport and didn't want to go through lengthy visa applications, so she decided on going to Morocco and then London, with a layover in Spain on the way. She was excitedly telling me how her layover was just long enough for her to go out to Madrid and hang out with some friends she made at the airport. I told her there was no way she could do that, as she didn't have a visa and she couldn't leave the airport, hence why she didn't go to any country in the Schengen zone in the first place. She didn't listen to me and said she was sure she could work something out, and since it was nighttime, it would probably be fine, because she was able to leave the airport in Toronto without a visa once, and it happened to be nighttime. Passengers on their way to the US with a layover in Canada are able to leave the airport without a visa for something like 72 hours. Literally all it took was a quick Google search to explain away Canada, and entering Spain without a visa just wasn't going to happen. But she didn't believe me. Anyway, a few hours later I got a load of texts about how upset she was that she wasn't able to leave the airport, and how embarrassing it was for her, because she made plans. She thought she would be able to enter the country without a visa purely out of entitlement, and I just couldn't fathom how she didn't understand basic international law. Grew up in a farming and military town in SC. A few rich folks, lots more poor folks. One of the rich ones had the last name McDonald, shit you not, and his family was loaded. Antebellum farmers, owned and rented out close to 100,000 acres of prime tobacco land. Mac was a trust fund baby and never bothered to do anything but suckle from the family teat. He made damn sure that everyone knew how much his family had, and to always fuck with us Southsiders and Eastsiders, the poorer areas of the town. About 10 years after graduation, got together with a bunch of my buddies from back then, had a mini reunion of sorts. I'd just earned my commission in the F. A couple others had as well. One guy, Scotty, owned a small comic and collectibles shop, and my buddy Corey works for the post office. Nobody's getting rich, but we are all proud and doing pretty good for a bunch of poor kids from Sheethole SC. We go out for drinks and Mac shows up. Mac, being Mac, couldn't keep his mouth shut and we get tired of it, pay our tabs, and go to leave. Scott, the comic shop owner, popped off with something along the lines of, "At least we are not still sucking daddy's dick at 30. This, dear friends, pushed Mac over the edge. For some reason, rather than taking a swing at Scott, he hits Corey. Now, friends, this is important, because Corey works for the post office. Not as a postman, or delivery driver, or even in station management. No, he's a special agent with the US Postal Inspection Service as a liaison agent with the FBI. He always just said he works for the post office, because explaining that he was a cop who worked for the post office was confusing for most. Several people dogpile Mac, the local PD arrive, and Mac finds out that he sucker punched a federal agent. PD takes everyone's statements, and Corey most definitely wants to press charges. Mac's dad somehow caught wind and showed up, screaming up and down at him for embarrassing the family. This was the last straw. etc. In the end, Mac got cut off from the family fortune, ended up doing 6 months in FCI Bennettsville, and from what I've heard, is now working for a large burger chain named after a red bird. I went to school with this girl who was the daughter of a CEO and pretty well off. Well off enough that I'm not sure why she went to our crappy school, but oh well. She was nasty to me and basically anyone she considered lower than her, which was pretty much anyone outside of her circle of friends. Her default was, "So how's your love life?" She could taunt someone for being ugly or unlikable. We were both in a lot of classes together, so I had to deal with her shit a lot. She liked taking the kids out if my hair, weight, skin, or hobbies. So I don't have much sympathy for the things that happened after high school. First, her best friend realized what a vapid cunt she was and cut her out. Most of their mutual friends sided with the friend. Rich girl was left friendless, and since she had alienated everyone else previously by being nasty to them, she was pretty much ignored or outright hated all through 6th form. This led to something of an emotional breakdown. Her parents bought her a high-end Mercedes the minute she turned 17, earliest you can learn to drive in the UK, as well as a 5-day intensive driving course. It took her something like 3 or 4 attempts to pass her test anyway, but she drove herself to school a couple of times before anyway. One day, somehow she lost control of her fancy car and drove through the locked school gate, crashing into a building and causing thousands of pounds worth of damage. Her dad not only paid for everything to be fixed, but he managed to prevent her from being expelled and prevented her getting any points on her license. To avoid an insurance claim, he bought her a new car, this time a Porsche. She whined because it was slightly lower end than her Merc, and she lost out on a few features. I believe there were over incidents of her hitting other cars or stationary objects in that school car park, but I can't remember them. She once saw me out in my 1993 Peugeot 206 on a driving lesson with my dad. She took a picture and tried to start sheet on Facebook and at 6th form about me, but no one was having that sheet. I don't even know what specifically she thought they'd find funny, since most of them drove similar cars, if they even drove at all. Some time passed, but before the end of the school year, she crashed again. This time, she drove through a no entry sign at high speed into a tram stop. When she realized where she was, she panicked and overcorrected like crazy. Ended up somehow flipping the car into its roof. This time, they couldn't get out of it, and she almost lost her license. Her dad bought her a convertible after that. I don't know if he didn't see the irony, or if he hoped she'd flip that one and kill herself. She came into the supermarket I worked at with her mum, who was one of my regular customers. I didn't know at the time that she was this girl's mother. She spent the whole time at the checkout smirking and looking me up and down, trying to subtly be nasty to me without her mother noticing. When I didn't rise to it, she said something along the lines of, "Wow, I can't believe you work here. I would never lower myself to working at a job like this." Her mum, who was actually really nice, whirled on her before I could say a word and said, "No, you think you're above anything that isn't easy or bought for you, don't you? If you did work here or anywhere, actually, you might be half as grown up and independent as this girl." It was honestly epic. Nasty girl's face was priceless. She tried to throw a few more subtle insults my way about me and about my boyfriend at the time, pretending it was just her making conversation. But her mum and I froze her out of the conversation and had a nice chat about normal things until the girl stormed off in tears. Once she was gone, her mum apologized for her and told me that she was sorry for how she must have been to me through high school. I was honestly surprised as hell she'd turn in her kid like that, but I had known this woman about a year at that point and she knew what kind of person I was and liked me. I was on a but crack of dawn flight out of Chicago one morning and was auto upgraded to first class. Before we even boarded I noticed a Diva 21-ish Paris Hilton Wannabe causing problems with the flight staff. She was traveling with what appeared to be a nanny/keeper who spoke to the lower beings for her. As her demands were not being met, she regressed into a stumping 2-year-old. Lucky me got to sit directly behind her in first class, and as I listened to her bitch about everything, I also paid attention to the flight attendant state there was only one of a certain meal available, and I heard her tell her keeper that's what she wanted, so I ordered it when the attendant came by just to see her reaction. When it came her time to order, and the attendant told her it was no longer available, she demanded that whoever ordered it give it to her. I politely refused, and she about melted down, calling me just about every dirty name she could think of. The flight attendant told her they would be forced to either have an officer waiting for her when we land, or force a landing to remove her from the plane if she didn't calm herself down. When she started with the veiled threats, the nanny told her to calm down and reminded her of what your father said about another issue. I calmly smiled, ate my breakfast, raved to my seatmate about how good it was for airplane food, and pretended she didn't exist. She sat there and cried. Definitely not the direction that the question intended for an answer to take, since the rich kid in my story isn't really spoiled, but regardless it's an interesting story point. When I was in high school, 9th grade I believe, I went to a trail camp, meaning for a week we slept on wooden bunks, cooked all our own food over the fire from freeze-dried packets, purified our own water, etc. It certainly wasn't the most difficult trail, but it was still work. So there was this boy from France, Paris specifically, and none of us actually knew he was filthy rich, because we couldn't put 2 and 2 together that living in Paris equals money. But it was his turn to wash dishes, and he was doing it all wrong, and we were like, dude, do you even know how to wash dishes? And he replies, not really, my butlers always do it for me at home. And that's when it hit us. Then he proceeds to ask if we can show him how to do it right, because he wants to learn, so he can still do his part in the group point. So we taught this kid all sorts of stuff, because he was always ready to learn, and he didn't once complain about anything though our entire trip. Not prior to, or after everyone finding out about his lifestyle. He also mentioned he'd never camped or done anything like this before. There were plenty of people on that trail that complained to all hell, and not one of us was more privileged than him. He also did quite a bit more work than those same people point, so that was a pretty interesting experience of seeing the real world hitter, not so spoiled, rich kid. Oh, I finally have a good story for this. There was a tight-knit group of kids in my high school who all had wealthy prominent parents, probably about 6 to 7 of them, at least 3 were girls. A couple of these parents donated a lot of money to the school and the athletics programs. One of them was a judge, and another was the chief of police for like 100 years. These kids got away with literally faking everything, and they were complete assholes. So before the homecoming dance they all went to a party at one of their houses, unattended by any adults, obviously, and got completely plastered. One of the guys drives them all to the dance, drunk, and because of who their parents are they make it in, although they are clearly inebriated. So one of the girls, Brianna, somehow runs face first into the other girl, Rachel, and then also falls face first on the floor and completely fucks up her own face. Blood everywhere, broken nose, chipped tooth, the whole thing. I'm pretty sure she ended up having plastic surgery. Rachel was completely fine, except she somehow lost a huge clump of hair right in the front of her head. LMAO. Anyway, security called in a couple of officers as well as an ambulance. One of the kids had to get his stomach pumped because he had continued drinking something he snuck in. The dance was ruined. The kid who drove got busted for it. They all got sent to this really shady correctional school for the rest of the year and weren't going to be allowed to walk at graduation until their parents put a lot of financial pressure on the school. So they walked, except the kid who got the DUI. It was nice to finally see them have to face some consequences and embarrass their equally shitty parents. It was the talk of the town for a long time. For a fun side story about this group, Brianna was in my grade, so she wasn't graduating with the other kids. She came back for our senior year, and although she was knocked down a peg she was still a cruel bully. So she made the volleyball team, and we were practicing for a game when I spiked the ball next to her, and she took a step to perfectly align her face with the ball. I mean, what is with this girl? Look out for your face. Use your limbs to protect your face. So there were tears and blood from the nose again, of course. I feel bad, because I didn't mean to hurt her, but it doesn't keep me up at night. One time I was talking to this group of people about this girl I liked. One suggested taking her to Comic-Con. That would be a 3 to 5 hour Greyhound ride plus hotel rooms in New York City for 2 people plus the cost of admittance to Comic-Con and the cost of everything there, and the cost of food while there, etc. all on the off chance that she'd even be interested in Comic-Con. I was like, nah, I don't have the cash lying around for something like that. I'm a broke as whole college student lol. And his response? Dude, you're a student. Just take a loan and tell them it's for college. Get like $10k so you aren't poor. I reminded him That I had money in my bank account that let me live the normal student's life very comfortably, but would be bankrupted by this trip, but he wouldn't take that as an answer and kept telling me to just get my parents to co-sign on the loan for me. My parents don't have any money to pay off a $10k loan any more than I do, and my parents' credit isn't that good due to my mom being trapped in a cycle of debt. He couldn't get this through his skull. Eventually, I put it in no unclear terms that I was not taking out a loan for something unnecessary like that, despite the fact that with my future degree I could easily pay it off, and that while I would be willing to take a loan out if strictly necessary. He was a fool if he thought I was going to put myself in debt at 19 over faking Comic Con, and my plan is to graduate with no debt, which I'm well on my way doing. He told me I was, quote, trapping myself in poverty. The entire rest if the group instantly came down on him and still gets on his case to this day. Long story, pretty much Tokyo Drift IRL point senior year of high school, new school, and it was my third day. I had a 05 Pontiac GTO with hella rust on the sides and the interior was ripped to sheet. But good lord did my grandpappy and I love to work on it. 267k miles on that old girl point anyways. Douche's kid pulls up with a brand new off the lot 2010 Nissan GTR. Now, when I started my car, it would struggle until you heard a big VROOM. Nice deep growl due to it being a high-O in January, so it was 6 degrees. Kid says, damn, that thing sounds like it's about to blow up. I replied, yeah man. She hasn't let me down yet. Which he casually gets in his GTR with his absolute bombshell girlfriend. At that moment, my girl decided to go back to sleep in the middle of the parking lot. Well, dude drives by and says, hasn't let you down yet, huh? Thing's a piece of shit, man. I'll sell you my old Mustang GT for cheap, bro. Much better than that shit can. So I waited for my grandpa to come jump my car. When we got home I said, hey papa, can we throw on the Hoosiers for tomorrow? He says, what the hell are you thinking? No, you'll slip and crash somewhere. So 18-year-old me decided, nah, I'm gonna throw on the Hoosiers. I went to school the next day and walked up to the kid in the study and said, hey man, you serious about the GT? He goes, oh no dude, I was just kidding. It's gonna be my little brother's when he turns 16 next week. And I said, I'll race you for it. My GTO, your GTR. He says, that thing literally sheet out on you yesterday man. No, that would be too easy. Of course I'm getting laughed at. I don't want that rust bucket of yours catching on fire, man. I reply, look, not even for the great, but I wanna race. I put a new intake and exhaust on it. There was a lot more on that thing. And I wanna see how it does against a GTR. He says, how about win a $100? I then offered up my entire Jimmy John's life savings. How about $1,500? He laughed, are you faking serious? Okay bet bro. Well, turns out the kid and I shook on it and he didn't know how to control his car. Ended up crashing his GTR on top of telling his dad he owed me $1,500. His dad says, you're on your own, I don't know what the fuck to tell you. But I just said, dude, keep it. He drove a 93 Toyota Camry he bought off some kid the rest of his senior year and throughout college. Also, by mid-track I had him buy at least 3 car lengths. The Pontiac was totaled by a drunk driver 8 months later. I was okay though, and I was able to recover the entire engine. Still have it sitting in my garage trying to find a new silver GTO to put it in. But they're hard to come by. To start with, my parents are pretty wealthy, but we never lived like it, and I didn't even know they had money most of my life point anyways. My first college girlfriend's parents were a doctor and lawyer. She was alright, but I was oblivious to a lot of red flags, because I was in my first adult relationship. She was always humble, bragging about how her parents had money, saying she'd like, oh, high school was so tough for me, because my parents are rich, and it put the other kids off. So I wore the cheapest clothes I could, but that would piss off my folks, because they wanted me to dress at a level representative of our means. Seriously, that sounds tone deaf as hell, but she'd really say that kind of shit. I guess being from parents with money was really hard for her, so I eventually went and met her family in another state. Their house was huge, opulent, and their cars were newer and expensive. Her parents could barely hide their contempt for me. She later told me that they thought I wasn't from a background appropriate enough to be with her. Apparently, since my parents were in the army and I had just signed a contract with the Marines, we were a bunch of uneducated, knuckle-dragging simpletons. Also, they thought I was the devil incarnate because I was a gooner. After that, I got the impression that her dating me was similar to wearing her poor clothes. When she came to my parents' place outside DC, she thought their 4-bedroom house was quaint. At this point, I should mention that my parents were both officers who were experts in their respective military intelligence fields. They are highly educated. Mom had a master's and dad a doctorate. My dad worked at the highest echelons of different intelligence agencies, held a super important position in the Pentagon, and, at that time, was working right under the Secretary of Defense. He's met presidents. Her family pretty much didn't recognize a difference between an experienced, high-ranking officer and a private who got in on an ASVAB waiver that doesn't know what end of the broom to use. Now my folks didn't have money because of their positions or experience so much as because they were damn smart with money and made a bunch of smart stock market investments in the '80s and '90s. Anyways, money was never important in my family, and I didn't even know what kind of money they had until I was an adult. We eventually broke up due to her inexcusable behavior. I remember her saying something to the effect of maybe now I'll date someone from money like my dad said I should. A few years later, she ran into me at a bar and tried catching up. Perhaps it was because she was drinking, but she actually revealed that her parents had gone bankrupt due to overextending themselves financially and their house was repossessed. That's when I told her that my poor, uneducated military family has considerably more money than her family had when we were dating. She looked so crestfallen. Now, about 12 years later, my folks have a big historic Victorian mansion with a bunch of land, awesome cars, and properties in different East Coast cities. I hope her and her folks are living under an overpass with their thumbs up each other's assholes. Don't faking look down on my family. By the way, I didn't mean to sound like I'm bragging. My folks' money isn't mine, though they did help me out financially in some hard times. TLDR, my mongoloid military family actually turned out to have more money than my ex's snobby parents. I was doing a ride along with local police one evening. They get called to scene of an accident. Drunk driver. Nobody hurt. By time we get there, driver was already restrained in back of a police car. Several other police already standing around. Complication was that her baby was still in the car. Driving drunk with her baby. They had reached out to driver's parents, who were on their way. Drunken brat screaming to everyone they were in huge trouble when daddy go there. Think she was crying he was a lawyer. They're all gonna be in trouble a day at a point. Police confident in the arrest, but were afraid of the brewing shitstorm, trying to be sure everything was strictly by the book, and they had witnesses to the incoming lawyer/daddy. Gentleman pulled up, introduced himself to the police, asked if he was allowed, get car seat and supplies out of the wrecked car ECT, and cooperated until they got baby safely strapped into his own car. He straightened himself up, asked who the arresting officer was. Officer stepped up, said his full name, and that he'd be taking her to get booked at this station if he wanted to meet them there. Daddy looked at crying drunk brat in car, screaming for her to make them let her go, and flat out said, "Okay, I'll reach out about a criminal lawyer tomorrow. Thank you for alerting me to come collect the baby." He probably used kid's name, but I don't recall what it was, and just left. Brat went from angry scream to ugly cry as it set in. Police all sighed with relief. Daddy was at least realistic about the situation at hand. Richest kid I knew was my lab partner back in college. His dad founded a pharma company that was purchased for something like XXX million dollars. I tell this story to everyone. We played WoW vanilla together like total crack addicts. Pee in a bottle type addiction. He had an Amex Centurion card and would buy us anything and everything. Complete lunches, dinners, snacks, clothes, video games. He bought his girlfriend a car and charged it on the card like it was nothing. Honestly, nicest guy, and most of our circle of friends asked for nothing. He was just a fellow gamer. But he would always show up with tons of stuff and told us he would throw it out if we didn't take it. He spent like $40,000 one month on eBay Wow Gold and shared it with all of us. This was when gold was so hard to get point anyway. We both ended up failing our lab exams, which is a mandatory requirement to get the credit for the course. The big problem was that the lab component is only offered in the winter semester, so we had to delay our graduation by a full year. I got a job at Best Buy and just worked and dicked around for a year, then redid the lab course and graduated finally. My lab partner friend never came back. He just said to me one day that his dad was sending him to same-set Singapore private school to do a 2-year program in God knows what. He just looked so defeated and sad. Never heard from him again. Didn't even get to finish his degree. Edit. Deleted some info that could identify the person. Worked at a fast food place across the street from a very big university for $8.25 an hour 4 years. Worst one I ever saw was a pretty little white blonde girl. They are infinite around here. Literally in the middle of our restaurant on a cell phone and screaming at the top of her lungs so loud her face was strawberry red. Daddy, I need my $500 a week early this week. I talked to that bitch you married about it already. Tell your guy to get that money in there now. She whirls around at the 2 guys in line in front of her and demands she be allowed to cut them because she was, apparently, in a faking hurry to get to the bank. They deny her, which sends her into another age point. Screeches. Fuck this whole bullshit university. Gets in a car that's worth more than I will earn in the next 3 years and tries tearing out of the parking lot. Only, she totals it by slamming into a median and bottoms it out, so that all 4 of her tires are off the ground and her front bumper gets sheared off in the process. Gets out, starts slamming her fists in the hood. She is screaming so loud, only for a RAPS truck to hit a puddle next to her and faking drench her from head to toe with puddle water. I get off in 15 minutes from her little episode, but stay at work for the next 2 hours watching her have a breakdown as the tow truck shows up to get her car off the median, and, what I can assume is a boyfriend, picks her up in an equally expensive car with a towel in the front seat so she doesn't mess up his interior. I sat there with a cherry Fanta and watched it all from a window point. I'm sure daddy paid for it all, but hey, it was entertaining. I was at the mall and I was doing some window shopping for a little bit, trying to figure out what I wanted. I finally got to one of the shoe stores within the mall. There was this younger kid, possibly 12 to 15 years old, who made a big fuss to his mom because of a pair of shoes he wanted, one of the harder pairs to get, but she said that he had to get something appropriate for school. He kept on screaming and insulting his mom, calling his mom a bitch and a stupid hoe. The kid was really annoying. The kid also had very expensive clothing on, wearing an MCM hoodie, some Jordans, and other very high-end shit. I think he even had a Hermes belt point. So his mom caved in and asked one of the store reps to get him the shoe. Well, guess what? There was one more size left, but it was half a size bigger at 8.5 US in men's. The kid kept on talking smack to his mom and begging her to get the last pair of shoes, and it got to a point where I got involved and told her, "You gotta keep your son in check. He's looking really stupid right now by cussing at you and making a scene." I then scolded the kid and told him, You're going to have to faking chill. This ain't your house, and we got other people here." The kid started sighing and mumbling bullshit and said some smart ass shit to me. He was like, "You're not my dad, so why do I got to listen to you, you asshole?" I then told the rep, "Let me see them shoes you got for this kid. I'm going to make his day." The kid then got quiet and I looked at him shortly before ringing up. He smiled with a sheet grin. Rest assured, I got up to that counter and bought that last pair of the 8.5 shoe and then immediately walked right out with it while the kid stared me walking out. Right when I got to the front, I asked a few heads what sized shoes they wore and jackpot gave them shoes away. I looked at the kid and he started pouting and had tears rolling down his eyes. I also remember him turning red and just looking salty as shit. Lesson here: don't start a damn scene and act like a stupid brat disrespecting your mom and strangers. I was real good friends with a rich kid when I was 12. His family was much wealthier than ours. Huge house, nice stuff, nice neighborhood. His parents were real down to earth though, and had earned their wealth through legitimate hard work. His parents and my parents were good friends, so we always played together at each other's houses. We got on real well, and he was a nice kid, but very spoiled. He had every console from every gen from the Northeast to the PS1, including handhelds. He had multiple Digimon, and every rare Pokemon card. He even had 3 Mewtwo's and 2 Charizards. He got a new BMX every Christmas. This kid basically had everything a kid dreamed of having in the mid-late 90s. He was also privately schooled, and an only child. My family was lower middle class. We'd just immigrated a few years earlier and still trying to get everything together, having started from scratch in a different country with no connections or safety net. His birthday was coming up, and I was super excited. His parents' house and yard were huge, with a pool, spa, sauna. I knew it would be good fun, and I was legitimately looking forward to celebrating the birthday of what at the time was one of my only friends. We'd hang out, and he'd talk about how awesome it was going to be, how his parents had hired a giant inflatable slip and slide, and how they were setting up a mini laser tag arena in the guest house. The invites were custom printed Pokemon invites that each had a Pokemon card attached. I never got one of those custom printed invites with a Pokemon card attached. And it wasn't that I didn't get invited, I was explicitly not invited. This news had to be passed to me via my mother, who had it passed to her by his mother. My mother took me aside and told me exactly how it was. He doesn't want you at his party because he thinks we are too poor to buy him a nice present. He'd basically invited his entire year level from his private school because he knew they were wealthy and would buy him expensive presents. Even kids I knew he didn't like were invited just because their parents were wealthy. I knew we weren't wealthy, but my parents tried hard to give us a normal upbringing. I had never felt poor before. I've never felt poorer since not getting one of those custom printed Pokemon invites with a Pokemon card attached. Not a single one of those rich private school kids showed up to his party. Not one. I overheard his mother telling my mother that he spent the entire day in the guest house bathroom crying because no one showed up. Turns out I was basically his only real friend. I never saw or spoke to him again after that. Our parents were still friends, but I would stay home when my parents visited his and would go play with my poor friends. When they visited us, my mother brought him up a few years ago when I was visiting for Christmas. She was still quite good friends with his mother and would have regular catch-up telephone calls. Their last call was basically his mother asking for parenting advice. All of my mother's children had left home, gotten jobs, gotten partners, and were doing well for themselves. He was pushing 30, still lived at home, had never had a girlfriend, and refused to get a job. She just couldn't work out where she'd gone wrong. TLDR. Spoiled rich friend didn't invite me to his dad's party because I was poor. He spent his birthday alone. Oh my god, my time to shine. I wish I wasn't on mobile. I knew a kid who got embraced by an ultra rich stepdad and a bimbo mom who previously sold designer apparel with her blonde bombshell fake Baywatch body of the 90s. She found her sugar daddy and he his trophy wife. That was with the exception which was the baggage of a stepson. This kid had it all. 30k a year, private education, the summer camp experience, 90s-era Disney used to portray, real WW2 gear to play army, a 4-wheel and dirt bike track in his backyard, professionally designed treehouse, every game system and toy money could buy, a literal house so big that playing tag or hide and seek in it would leave you winded once you got past the elevator powered multi-floor garage. Professional magicians at birthdays, yacht and country clubs, VIP access at all venues, etc. The list goes on. Anyways, the mom never gave a shit. The stepdad tried, like goddamn this guy gave a shit about the son he never had. But the kid decided to hightail it with gold digger mom, rather than stay when they split, went from townhouse to trailer, and got into drugs with her. Last I saw, he went driving, while drunk without a windshield, caused a fuel truck to jackknife on a bridge leaking its contents, decided to light up a cig while being screamed at during detainment by the cops for obvious reasons, and pissed himself in the back of the cop car, all 100% in the paper and local news. Then on the eve of trial scheduled for the above incident, got busted trespassing and stealing alcohol in the stepdad's boat in a private boat yard, and missed his trial. I only heard he had the book thrown at him, since he was an adult at the time of the bridge incident. A few years ago, I was picking up my oldest from kindergarten. I decided to take my 10-month-old out to play in the snow. Little left on the grass, but roads were clear before class ended, since snow doesn't usually fall where I live. After I pick up my son, we walked back to my car and I see a trail of stuff leading from the vehicle in front of mine to my car. The other driver was a 17-year-old kid who only just passed his driver's exam a week before. His parents bought him a brand new Audi A8 as a gift. He decided to show off to his friends in a school zone where he lost control of his car, hit mine and totaled both. School had just let out when this happened, and he would have hit some children if my car wasn't parked where it was. His parents came down because he didn't know what to do. They were also clueless. I gave them the info I had on navigating the insurance debacle. I was repeatedly told they would not be allowing their son to continue driving until he took another course, and they most definitely would not be buying him another vehicle. They had him listed on their insurance, so he drive up their rates while his record was still clean. Stupid insurance company basing accidents on the vehicle, not the driver. I heard his yelling from inside his vehicle over 25 feet away. He wasn't happy. He didn't apologize. Last I saw of him, he drove a beater. Housemate was a total shat, but we tolerated him. He had been born well off, was an Me4 caterpillar, had a great job traveling the world, but hated anyone who wasn't American, white, and conservative. Traveled so much that he only needed a room about a week a month, so he had a cheap room with us college students. Was making a ton of money, but hated that he had to pay union dues, but loved rubbing our noses in how he had money and we were eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. He finally got his big chance, a promotion to management, big bucks, no union, moving him to corporate in Atlanta, the whole thing. He spent a month traveling around, getting things in place, meeting the new bosses, signing a lease in a complex in ATL, packing, and getting ready. He was leaving us with an empty room, and we scrambled to replace him, but was pissed when we weren't giving his deposit back, since we were going to have to eat his rent. He threatened to sue. 2 days before he was scheduled to leave, corporate called, said they were making some changes, his job had disappeared, and because he was now management, he didn't have union protection. He still had the room at our place for a month, but we had replaced him, and he would need to move to the very expensive place in ATL with its very expensive lease. One of the most poignant moments of my life was seeing him standing at the screen door at twilight, looking out, utterly defeated. I didn't like him, but nobody deserved this pain. His name was Zach. His dad was old drinking buddies with my dad. Anyways, Zach's dad is loaded and basically gave Zach whatever he wanted, and growing up in the backwoods, it was four-wheelers and snowmobiles. He had this blue Banshee he would ride into the wee hours of the night. For those of you who don't know, Banshees are basically really fast, really loud ATVs. And he would ride it past my house almost every night with his friends. He always bragged and showed off the latest thing his dad bought him, new snowmobiles and four-wheelers every year, along with his first car, when he turned 16, and was even going to buy him a house. Anyways, the little fuck would spend time at my house. Like I said, our dads were drinking buddies, and he was irritable. He was a few years younger than me, but the same age as my little sister, who he basically stalked, always talking about how amazing he was around her, and saying that she should be on it. He's even paying attention to her. She eventually agreed to go on one date with him, which ended with her dumping her popcorn on him and kneeing him in the crotch when he tried to feel her up in the theater. I was super proud of her for doing that. After that, our dads got into a massive fight because Zach was a little prick. And Zach's dad felt his son could do what he wanted and called my sister a hoe. I was surprised Zach and his dad left with no bullet holes in their heads. Zach was turned on almost immediately. My sister was ridiculously popular and was top of her class, and when she told people what Zach had done, he was ostracized. Even his little cronies turned on him. Zach would move a few months later. Fast forward to now, I haven't seen him in years. Last I heard though, he dropped out of college, still lived off his dad, and had knocked up 2 different girls, neither being his girlfriend. So yay, fuck that guy. TLDR. popular rich as hole, feels up my sister, bites him in the ears when everyone turns on him. So this feels silly, in hindsight, to discuss as a personal struggle, but only just last year, as a 27-year-old woman in the Midwest, I finally got the experience that your average person would have gotten at 18 when moving out of their parents' home. Point generally, my life has been privileged. I had a job beginning in my sophomore year of high school, working 3 to 4 nights a week as a waitress for spending money, which I held for 3 years. At 18, I got accepted to a public college and moved into a dorm my college was paid for, and my parents provided me with a credit card. I squandered that year of college, moved home, attended college online, which I completed, and was later paid off by my parents also. Over the last 10 years I have had 6 jobs and maximumed out that credit card 4 or more times, only to have that problem wiped away by my parents after high school. I've never had to work a job I didn't like. I never appreciated the importance of money or saving money or having to work hard for the things I want, much less the things I need. I knew my parents would always be my backup until now. They decided, rightfully, that throwing money at my problems would never help me learn. So, for the first time, I'm forced to solve my own financial issues and keep a job that I may not care for. I'm aware of how childish and privileged it sounds to say that experience is faking with my mental health. Just realizing how the world really works at 27 and coming to terms with the reality of my future, that my parents' wealth is not my wealth and my late in life realization is not entirely my parents' fault. I know this is not a funny or dramatic story, seeing some young adults with similar stories resulting in suicide or other tragic endings. It is so easy to discount them as entitled brats. Some, perhaps, deserve that title, but many are being thrust into a world they don't know how to live in because they have never had to learn those life skills. TLDR, entitled and spoiled kids are made by someone and allowed to enter the world with no skills to function in that world. This guy I know, he wasn't an only child, but he was so far from his little sister in age that he might as well have been. Because of this, he was pretty used to getting things his way, and this meant it applied to all areas of his life, including romance. He always was misunderstood, and that's why girls kept dumping him. But if you talked to them, they would tell you he was a weirdo with no respect for personal boundaries. Apparently he asked a girl out 13 times in the same day before he got the message of no. Add to the fact that his parents were weird and would tell him that girls need a little bugging to like a guy. In fact, I remember I was hanging out with him at a Comic-Con and his dad was pushing both of us to get some pictures with some girls and gave us a demonstration, which was walking up to random pretty young girls and asking for a selfie with them and then their number. In case you're wondering, it didn't work, and I felt grossed out by myself that I stopped after the second girl. Anyway, so we graduate and all's going well, but then one day we were supposed to go shoot the sheet and he never showed. His dad calls me, asks where he's at. I have no clue and tell him that I tried calling a few times, but he never picked up. Well, about a day later I see something I wasn't expecting. His mugshot. He was engaged in sexual chats, sending both pictures and videos of himself to who he thought to be a 14-year-old girl on Facebook, but was actually a cop. When he tried to go meet up with her to have sex, he instead got about 15 Glocks pointed at him. Dude spends 3 days in jail and then gets out scot-free. His mom has some serious connections with the law/judicial system in our town, being a popular lawyer herself. He denies any allegations that his mother helped him out, but I think it's a load of BS. It got swept under the rug so quickly. However, his reputation is shot because he was the talk of the town for about a good month and has since become a way humbler man. I live half a block from a big annual carnival that draws people from 5 different states. It can be a bit of a nightmare due to people parking wherever they feel like or crossing the street whenever they feel like. It's literally tens of thousands of people coming in even on slow nights. Being a row home neighborhood, I'm one of the few houses on the block that has a driveway, and people frequently block my driveway even when the carnival isn't going on. I guess they just assume that it isn't a driveway, even though there's no part of a house there. There's a car parked in it, and there's yellow paint on the curb. Seriously, I don't get why people can't figure out it's not a parking spot. A few years ago, I had been out for some reason, and when I walked back to my house, I never drive that week, just so my car doesn't get blocked from my driveway. I saw this monstrous sub blocking my driveway, and parked like a moron. It was at least a foot and a half off the curb, and parked at a horrible angle. Cars had to slow down to a crawl and carefully drive by to avoid an accident. I called the non-emergency police line and reported the issue. Within minutes, an officer was there and immediately was on his radio. About 10 minutes later, a flatbed tow truck shows up and the driver hitches up the car and starts pulling it on. Just then, the driver of the car and his girlfriend, or so I assume, show up. He was completely dumbfounded and didn't really know what to do. You could see it on his face. Meanwhile, his girlfriend, clearly of a lower income than him, or at least not dressed in not as fancy clothes, immediately jumped on her phone and began calling people to make sure that they had a ride home and weren't stranded. My neighbors and I enjoyed that evening. Went to school at a very prestigious southern college. My girlfriend at the time, now wife, has a roommate that came from money, like deep pockets, got a passing grade in a class. Treat yourself to a trip to the Rockies. Here, go grab a new car, etc. Which in and of itself isn't bad. It's how she treated my wife and those around here. Just a bad, spoiled little rich girl with no sense of common courtesy or decency. My wife came from a fairly poor household, grew up in double wide for the longest because her father, a cop at the time, and her mom, worked retail, just couldn't afford better at the time. Low, and behold, my wife drunkenly confides in the chick of her humble beginnings, ran around the campus, there, shared, sorority, and just about everyone how poor she was. And she was the epitome of white trash. TBH, it really hurt her feelings. They only lived together for like 2 years. But this sheet continued until graduation. Here come the good part. My wife is very smart, and yes, I brag. Entitled Beach started spending more and more of dad's money without actually accomplishing anything to deserve said money. So graduation rolls around. She's racked up tens of thousands of debt on her credit card that her daddy pays off. Come to find out, she's been ditching classes and failed just about every subject her final semester. She wanted to keep up appearances so badly she neglected to tell her pops she was in fact not graduating on time, and on top of that had racked up over 100k of debt without telling anyone anything. So here I am, sitting in the audience as my now wife walks across the stage, shining like a faking goddess. No sooner has she sat down than this ungodly racket comes from up in one balconies. The Beach's family had surprise shown up for her graduation. Learned that the Beach wasn't in fact graduating on time and all the juicy details. They had it out in the balcony in front of close to 5k people. Her pops said the debt was hers. He wasn't paying for her to finish her degree. He wasn't gonna pay for the debt, and she was on her own. I would be lying if I said I didn't enjoy every faking second of her humiliation. Second best day of my faking life. Correctional officer here. So there's been some entitled, spoiled, rich, cocky, college kids coming to jail either as a lodging where they're incarcerated or as a detox where they're in protective custody until they blow .000 back. The jail I work at is near a pretty snooty college, where it's well known that rich spoiled kids attend. I know that I could never afford tuition for it in my life. I'll always remember this one female that came in drunk AF and super beachy. She was a detox, so she was in protective custody, no incarceration, criminal charges, and no famous one phone call that people always mention. Short, skinny, tube top, tight pants, furry boots, the whole 9 yards of sorority sister. Came in demanding a phone call and to call her parents. Mind you, she was resisting, yelling at everyone, even started to kick at correctional staff. She was then escorted to where she would be living for the night, and she'd continuously drop her weight from under her and scream, not yell, but scream, saying her sorority name, screaming about her parents, and screaming at correctional staff. She was locked in a cell and screamed for like 30 minutes until I spoke to her very sternly, as if I was her parent. She eventually passed out leaning up against the wall while sitting on the floor. As someone who works for a living and earns things in life, it was good to have justice to a spoiled brat and hold one accountable for their actions. I know there are going to be some disagreeing commenters here. However, it can't be worse than the residents here at work. It's kind of long, but I will try to explain it. When I was younger, I went to a private high school, quite expensive, but not so popular, since it was kind of new. I arrived at that school when I was in 8th grade and the classroom was small and everyone was really friendly. There was a girl in my class that had a pretty weird last name. We will call her Kira. I'm talking from South America and her last and first name was clearly from Europe. One day after a parents meeting, my father told me that Kira's father was the 5th richest man in the whole country. I googled him and his net worth was around $2 billion at the time. I was shocked. The next day I asked her about his father's job and she very kindly explained what she knew about it. She was always pretty sweet, and after that day everyone in my class knew she was extra millionaire, but other from day-to-day jokes about her wealth and how she could buy the school if she wanted, nothing changed. Fast forward to our senior year. A student is translated to our classroom from one of the top 3 private high schools in the country, which was more expensive than our high school. Due to this, he came the first day thinking that he was wealthier than every one of us. For context, this was the time that the iPhone 5 was around and everyone had one, and Kira always loved her old BlackBerry, so she kept using it. During our first break we went to introduce ourselves with the new kid. He wasn't that friendly, so the conversation got to a point where someone asked what his father did for a living. From that point forward he started to brag about how much money he had and the cars he had, until he started talking about his dad's new Porsche. The kid will be known as spoiled kid. SK. My dad bought the most expensive Porsche in the market. That Porsche Boxster is a true beast. While showing us photos in his iPhone 5, Kira, it looks great, but isn't the Porsche 911 more expensive than that one? SK. Seeing her BlackBerry. How could someone with a BlackBerry know what expensive means? In that moment everyone got cold for a moment and Kira, who was a sweetheart, but not someone to mess with, started laughing and went away. We all started laughing, and SK couldn't understand why. We started to leave him alone when I told him that girl is first name, last name. Google her last name and you will know why everyone is making fun of you. He didn't talk to anyone for 4 days. My classroom has only 15 students, and then he apologized to Kira and to the entire classroom for being a douche. I always think that we had money. Turns out we didn't. My parents just spoiled me every time I threw a fit. When I was 16 years old, I chose to do a biography assignment on my mom because I realized I knew little of her youth. My mother always told me her best birthday gift was every 3 years she'd get new slippers, since she tore through her one pair from growing. Also, that her annual gift was fabric to make her own dress, and that she didn't see a movie until she was 17 years old. I think this is the best decision for me, which hurt me the most, since cinema had shaped my life up to that point. She also never had an education and didn't read until her late 30s. Learning about how my mother grew up was life-changing to me, and tell me about how to grow your life. We weren't rich, but I was spoiled rotten. She was born in a rural farm where was no electricity, and when she moved to America for the first time at 23, she asked her soon to be husband what the white machine in the kitchen was, and he said, a dishwasher. To which she replied, I knew white women were lazy. He is self-experience. This inspired for me to never ask for money or beg again. Starting that month I saved 3 months of wages to buy my first camera at 16. I now make way more than I thought possible with my camera, and I don't think without her struggles and hearing about her struggles, I would ever get close. I was in RA back in the day. The 90s are back in the day, right? In a big tower hall, 13 stories tall. The tower was at the top of a hill, so it got real windy around the complex, especially in winter. Some kids like to open their windows because it would get really hot. We had the 11th floor. We had the freshman dorm, so there were 2 RAs, me and a LE major. The LE major was a Hikuva guy. A real good guy. We were shooting the sheet outside his room. It's the middle of February, and it's cold as balls out, but hey, we are in the north. Let's open our windows. Because folks on both sides would open their windows, there would be a good flow through the floor, usually NW2SE in the winter. On the east side of the floor, room next to mine, was a rich kid. His old man was an attaché to the US Embassy to the Saudis. It was clear that he was not the usual kid who went to our school. He was far more erudite and far more worldly than most kids on the floor. He had a brand new Jeep and at least 3 high-end skateboard decks, so they were having a few people over. Being pretty quiet, though, until someone left the room, and someone slammed the door really hard, which caused a backdraft into the floor from the room. The floor filled with the smell of pot, and the other Ab and I, still chatting, decided we'd better go have a visit. Being a state school and a drug-free campus and all, the Le Major leads the show, and outside of the black light pot leaf poster in the room, and the bong in the corner, there's not much evidence, except for the fresh residue on the stem of the bong point. At this point, my buddy looks over to the other guy and says, "Is there anything else you'd like to share with us? We are going to have to call you in for this." The dude then opens the doors to his closet, and under a long black light are 4 pot plants, just hanging out under a long tube black light point. Needless to say, the cops came, and he never came back, except to pick up his stuff. And it turns out that his girlfriend had gotten pissed at him for not sharing, so she slammed the door on the way out. If she hadn't done that, we would have not known for a long time, if ever. He was really careful about toking, as near as we can tell, only when the wind was blowing the right way. I have to believe that the smell of the grow operation would have eventually permeated the room and the hallway, but who knows? With the right breeze, any smell in the room would go right out the window with the way the wind normally blew. I was once friends with this girl we will call Madison. Her daddy built windmills, and they were in the high millions. The dad left the company and sold his part. Madison on the other end acts all innocent and as if everyone is below her. Her dad gets sick and they blow through all their money within a year. Well, Madison suddenly needs to move out as they can't afford their $3 million house they bought. Oh, now they can't afford that $50,000 car. About after 2 months she was what the people call broke. She had nothing. She was ungrateful for what she had and lost it all. She never saved up her thousands in allowance from mommy and daddy, and now she had nothing. It was upsetting to see the entire family struggle, but ironic how they became below the class they looked down upon. I often ask her if she would change how she treated people and I just get tears, and yet she still has no concept that poor people are living things, but rather a clap clap and snap snap. The ironic part of this story though is that we ended up buying her house from the bank at $1 million discount off the asking price. I do not mean to brag if I come off as such, but anyway, I guess she didn't know we lived there till a few weeks ago, and boy was that shit awkward. Anyway, I told her that money doesn't matter in life as it's about the people in your life, and you are not even 18. You can still make something of yourself like my family did, and like I will. I was and will not be born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I'm grateful for the lifestyle I have and will do anything to keep my family safe and secure. It's just surprising how people go from the top to the bottom and suddenly there is nothing lower. I've got one point. I was a combat instructor in the United States Marine Corps, and we had a student come through on my first cycle. He was a slightly chubby black kid with very soft features. We take the students' phones away from them during the week so they can focus on their training. He got caught with a phone. When asked whose it was, he replied it was his. We take it away. The next day he has another phone. We take it away and ask whose it was, and he replied that it was his. We don't believe him, and he comes forward with "I have 5 phones." I ask him why he has 5 phones. He replies he needs them to match his suits. We take away the rest of his phones. Fast forward to near the end of the 1-month training cycle and I have 3 students approach me with an issue. So I ask the first one, "What's up?" He replied, "Sometimes at night, that student tries to kiss us while we are in our acts." Okay, next, "What's your issue?" The second replied, "Sometimes, when we are in the rain room, the shower, that student gets a hard on and tries to touch other Marines with it." This is getting worse and well above my ability to handle this in the field, let alone as a new instructor. I asked the last one, "What's up?" and he replied, "That student came on me last night. You wanna run that by me again?" I ask. He replied, that student is my fighting whole buddy and last night he sat on my chest and came on me. I grabbed my platoon sergeant and the three told their stories again. I went and got that student, sat him down nearby, and had a squad leader keep an eye on him. We notified our company first sergeant. That student was not stupid. He joined as a cryptologic linguist. He was very manipulative and his father, as he put it, was a rather wealthy man dragging the sounds out like a faking snob. He was dropped from the training company to an admin company where he did some seriously faked up shit. Somehow convinced our SNCO to have some sort of orgy in the duty hut. I really don't want to go into those details as I only have second-hand knowledge of that. Fast forward a good bit, and he got hit with a court-martial for sexual assault. Beyond that I don't know what happened to him, but I do know that will follow his ass around for the rest of his life. I remember in November of my final year of schooling, that some kids got suspended for damaging doors in a toilet block, which was just basically a building separated from the classrooms. They had to close the block for about 2 weeks because of the extensive damage and repair. After a week of the toilet block being closed, teachers were more prevalent around the playground and I couldn't find those boys who talked about it on the playground. I knew one of those boys was rich because he would drove to school in the newest type car, like the newest Hyundai or latest Honda. After the incident described above, I never saw his car until after our graduation, and it was only described in the first newsletter of the next year that 5 boys, I believe, were at fault. They could re-enter the school with 2 conditions: not skip any class, and not cause or be involved in any trouble. Not enter or register for any contests that the school organized. They put on about 6 contests every year with prizes, being from a BBQ free lunch to excursion to Threadbow just before Christmas time. They could change schools with the conditions. Photos of the damaged doors and toilets were shown to teachers and staff of the respective school when they registered. Our school would obviously contact the person in charge and explain the situation to them. They would not come within 50 meters of the previous school to talk with anyone and pay for a small portion of repairs. I also learned from a good teacher that those boys had their HSC certificates burned. No teacher was named, telling that multiple teachers took part, and it was done secretly so no one will ever know. Pretty strict school standards, and that's all I remember. So do you know what GoPro is? The camera company. So, my dad used to work there as the camera lens developer, the important part of the camera. Now, GoPro's founder, Nick Woodman, was another spoiled billionaire's son. This guy was the epitome of idiot. For example, one Thursday during my spring break I went with my dad to work. Nick was there in front of the building as my dad, and I got out of the car. And Nick, just got off some call, and Nick, finding the results of that call very unsatisfying, literally said God faking damn it, somehow not seeing that little 6-year-old me was there for like 3 whole minutes. When he realized I wasn't there he said hi and shook my hand, hoping that I'd forgot about it. Even though my dad had technically made GoPro successful, Nick never listened to his, or really anyone but his own advice, and did lots of stupid shit, thinking that he was too good and too rich to fail. After almost 5 years of making the cameras that made GoPro one of the best and most well-known camera companies in the world, my dad and the key members of his team left, as Nick was an arrogant cheathead who only listened to himself. I kid you not too long after, GoPro stocks crashed hard. Nick has been desperately trying to reclaim the success days of the past, but got hit by the bus of realization. Being a billionaire's kid means nothing when you only listen to yourself. The name of GoPro stocks, by the way, is GPRO, for proof that this isn't BS. Local princess makes the high school cheer squad. New recruits are instructed to keep the news under wraps until the coaches can let the girls who didn't make it know, and the team is announced at a special assembly at school. The girls sign paperwork and agree to a team social media policy. Among other things, it says you represent the school online ECT. Princess leaves the meeting, gets in her convertible with her 2 besties, who also made the team, cranks up a rap song with a bunch of explicit lyrics. The song's gist was "fuck you beaches," and Snapchats herself driving, singing/cursing and congratulating herself for making the team. I believe the school's name was called out during the clip. She's a popular kid, and within a short while the entire school and administration has seen the video. All 3 girls get called in. They are threatened with expulsion from the team, but at some point they decide to offer all 3 the same deal. They write a letter of apology to the school, do some community service hours, and they can rejoin the team. The 2 besties take this offer immediately. Princess refuses the offer. Claims that she didn't upload the video. The bud post defense, I guess, says she shouldn't be punished for that. What is interesting here is what happened next. The school axed her from the team. Her parents sued the faking school district. The school district refused to budge. Princess's mom writes a sob story letter to the editor that is printed in the local paper, full of excuses and justifications about why her princess was treated unfairly. The school district didn't budge. She was never reinstated to the team, and I don't know how the lawsuit ended. They got no sympathy from the community, and I'm pretty sure she felt like her life was ruined because the real world didn't buy her I didn't post the video defense. Kind of sort of the opposite. Kid did not know he was rich. He was normal. Lived in a nice upper middle class house in a suburb of NJ. Dad worked in the city, New York, and was partners with a guy in his company. Mom worked as a receptionist at a local college, so she could get the tuition break for him and his sister. Both worked hard. I was his roommate. I didn't know he was rich either. I hustled for money in college. Tending bar, painting student apartments for landlords, doing car repairs for students who didn't know how or couldn't be bothered. He worked hard during the summers as a short order cook at a tourist restaurant down the shore and usually made enough for books and some spending money, but invariably he would end up calling mom and dad for $50 here or there, but nothing outrageous. I would also invariably spot him some cash if we were going to the local diner after a night of shenanigans, but not often enough for it to be a problem, and he would spot me at times, so nothing remarkable. I met the parents many times, at their home, at school, etc. They were definitely comfortably middle class but nothing over the top. Dad drove a Nissan Maxima at the time and mom splurged and bought a Miata. Both cars were bought used, but they were about 2 model years old at the time. They sold the big house while we were in college and moved to a smaller condo/townhouse to save money. Flash forward to graduation time. He never wanted to work for dad, and he ends up getting a job with a major Fortune 500 company in their management training program instead of going to work for his dad. I get commissioned into the military and do my thing. All is good. We stay friends. He is a groomsman in my wedding, etc. He spends a couple of years doing the corporate thing and doesn't like all that is involved in it. He relents and goes to work for his dad. He also meets a young lady and falls in love. Part of dad's business is overseas. He has to go live in Italy for 6 to 12 months, however long it takes to learn the European operations. He proposes to his girlfriend when she comes to visit. It is a rather romantic and the middle class kid's dream. Then the phone call. He calls me to tell me the good news about his engagement. I'm really happy for him, but I can tell something is on his mind. I tell him to spill it and tell me what's up. This is what he says. How do I ask her to sign a prenup? I was confused. I said to him that prenups were for super rich folks. He doesn't need to worry about that. He proceeded to tell me about his family's net worth being in the hundreds of millions of dollars and how he didn't know this until recently because his father was getting ready to retire and he was grooming him to take over the textile import company that he was a partner in. Oh, and all the commercial real estate holdings in the New York City area that his dad had on the side, legally, that were paying well. He was stunned. He didn't know what to do. He understood the need to protect the business, and that is why his dad was suggesting a prenup. In the end I told him that he should ask his fiancée how she felt about it and go from there. Happiest of endings. They had a standard, whatever that is, prenup drawn up, and she signed it. They have been married for 20 years now with 2 children. He left the family business though. He sold his stake, moved away from the New York area, and opened his own handyman business. He works because he wants to, but he is filthy rich. To this day he gladly pays for all the drinks when we are together, and no, I don't think his kids know that mom and dad are filthy rich. I have lived with 25 different people from when I left for college to when I met my wife in my early 30s. Thank God I met her. I had a house after renting for a while and got this slug roommate from Miami whose dad was a driver. The slug had all of these wild stories about going on a safari in Africa and vacationing in Bali, etc. He went to high school with Drew Rosenhorse, big time sport agent, and knew all these famous people. He worked as a realtor and at an antique store. I would get a check that was mailed each month from his mom that was written to me. They didn't even trust him to deposit the money and rewrite a check to me. Slug Boy has a girlfriend, but is on the internet all of the time in chat rooms. In the old 56k days my house had 2 phone lines in it. Via the internet he reconnects with another girl in Miami. He leaves and moves back to Miami. A couple of months go by and things go south with the Miami girl. Slug Boy isn't happy and tells her in an AOL chat room, "I am going to burn your house down." He gets lighter fluid and starts her duplex on fire. I cut this from the news article. His blood-stained car was found in Miami-Dade County. The subject, who is being sought, faces charges of armed burglary of an occupied dwelling, arson of an occupied dwelling, 4 counts of attempted murder, and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. He busts into her apartment and is squirting lighter fluid everywhere. Lights the place on fire, and then he goes outside and lights her car on fire and then tries to run her over. The assault with a deadly weapon. He cut his head or hand breaking in and bloodied up his car, which broke down. It was a pose after the crime spree, and then he abandoned it in the road point. So Slug Boy lawyers up. He is looking at some pretty stiff time in jail. His dad gets him a psych doctor to say that he was deranged or didn't know what he was doing and totally skated on all the charges. His dad paid restitution on the car and burnt duplex, and his son did like 18 months in the psych ward. Point, he is still down in Miami as far as I know. This happened in 1998. I went to school in an affluent town of mostly doctors and lawyers. People with new money, demolishing houses and rebuilding McMansions the last 30 years. My parents weren't rich. We were lower mid class and only lived in the town because my mom partially inherited the house from her father when he passed. It was her childhood home and my grandfather's childhood home. I grew up with stories of my classmates skiing every weekend, in season, vacationing on their parents' yachts, and watching them drive their handy-down luxury cars to school. Point, my aunt, who is a social worker in town, alluded that my graduating class was one of the worst years of students with drug and alcohol problems she had ever seen in her 30 years of work. She never gave me names, nor did I ask for any, but she said most of their problems stemmed from absent parents. It made sense. Every Monday I'd overhear stories about crazy parties that happened over the weekend. I remember one story where my classmates in physics were laughing before class started about how they woke up passed out in a local park Sunday morning. They were worried about seeing the teacher because supposedly our physics teacher was at the park with his kids and came across them as they were waking up. There was one kid who was a pretty notorious when it came to partying. He was pretty friendly, smart, athletic, lacrosse, but some days he came to school completely wasted or in a daze. This kid frequently talked about how his parents wanted him to be a doctor and how he was set for life and his admissions to some well-known university was guaranteed because his dad went there. About the same time I graduated college, my sister brought up this kid's name. She is a police officer. Supposedly they arrested him for breaking into a house and attempted burglary of jewelry and silverware. I guess he was recently homeless and needed money to pay back his dealers. In a former life I was a nightclub manager. For a long time we hosted a night for scene/emo kids, 18 plus, but the word children is still appropriate. One of our regulars, he was a rich brat who got hit by a Mercedes when he was 16 and cashed out big time. Ironically, the driver was a rich, drunk, sheethead kid whose father settled outside of court. Parks and Rec fans will know the type. He would open conversations with "I'm 19 and worth $XXX''XXX. Pretty cool, right?" When he didn't get the admiration he thought he deserved, he turned into a dick, Marizo, and it was only a matter of time before a fight resulted. When it did, I banned him, and the vending machine sized security booted him. He refused to leave. Point, did I mention the security were the size of vending machines? It didn't go well for him. He literally threatened to call his father, who is not rich and powerful. The next night I rolled up to work, and there's a suit waiting at the door. He said he wanted to speak to management. He really did call his dad. I told the father why he was banned, and after some back and forward showed him the CCTV footage. The father was actually an alright guy, and knew the cash had turned his son into a sheet heel. He shook my hand and I never did hear from Dickhead McGee again. I had a girlfriend around my freshman year of college, was with her for 7 years. She suddenly left me for some guy who she met at her private school. He said he wanted to be a doctor. Was told by her that his dad got him a Tesla and a credit card for him to use that had a $10,000 limit that his dad would pay off for him every month. Oh, and this guy was a sophomore in high school. He had a whole wall custom made with drawers full of Lego pieces. Family went to Disney World about 2 times a year faking spoiled as hell. Dude didn't even have a job. Family told him he didn't need one. I was told all of this stuff while she was in person with me, begging me to stay while she stayed with him cause she wanted me for section sheet, which I obviously opted out. Anyways, the moment those two actually got out to the real world together, without actual compensation from the guy's family, everything went to shit. He dropped out of college, and, while I don't exactly have all the details, they're pretty much both working slightly above minimum wage jobs, frequently job hopping, both drink alcohol a ton and smoke, just really in the dumps. As for me, I had been working since I was 15, haven't had a break since. I too dropped out of college, but only because I had a job opportunity I thankfully was given that would support me and my new partner, paid off my thankfully small amount of student loans. Don't spend a ton of money of cigarettes or alcohol. What I'm saying is, she made a mistake, and I'm glad I got away from that situation when I did. Reverse situation. I was friends with an extremely down-to-earth humble guy in junior high and high school. We were friends for 4 to 5 years before I ever found out how wealthy his dad was. Worth well over $100M plus, but even his dad and family, his parents were divorced, were extremely down to earth and humble. He drove a shitty old hand-me-down car, never spoke about money. You'd never know this kid had the money their family had. Well, we all go off to college and stayed friends for most of that freshman year. However, once he got to college I think he began realizing he could use money for almost every aspect of his life. His dad was basically giving him a weekly allowance of $1,500 plus, while also paying for all the bills, and bought him a 2-bedroom place in Santa Monica that was $1.5 million. Friend said it was an investment property he got to live in during college. Well, college goes on, and I think he fell in love with people around him that just gave him constant praise and endearment. I don't think the people were necessarily super fake, but it was very clear these weren't the type of people that he would normally be friends with. College ends, they all go their separate ways, and now we are 6+ years removed, and he's lost basically all his friends. Last time we hung out he couldn't stop talking about his vacations around the world. He doesn't work, just travels and is still in school getting his 3rd undergraduate degree. Kinda sad how much the realization of money changed all the relationships in his life. A friend of mine, and still is, sorta, who is a spoiled rich kid because his parents own a big company. He's an international student at my uni. He pays people to do his assignment, both online and people he knows, rather than studying. Still fails courses as there are exams involved, which aren't hurdles, but you need to score at least 50% overall in the course, i.e. if you're sitting on 40 over 50 from assignments then you need 10 over 50 on your exam to pass. So my friend started asking me for help at the start, about 2 years ago, which I was more than happy to help. However, it gradually turned into me doing his whole entire assignment this year. I finally had enough as 2 semesters ago he started asking me for help, after I had specifically told him I couldn't help during my own examination periods as I was revising my own subjects. Last semester we had the same course and he chose to change into my class. We have a workshop which required us to be in teams for activities that would relate to our assignment. I'm at the back of the lecture theater with some randoms and form a team. He's in the middle and forms his own team there. As I'm at the back of the theater, I also sit in a higher seating position, so throughout the first workshop session, he sits on his phone the entire time, and I can see that he doesn't even bother opening up the uni computer to partake in whatever his team is doing, which I see them frantically working. Second week, same deal. He doesn't even bother contributing to his team, also international students, and arrived 30 minutes late and left 30 minutes early. Now the end of this week we have to hand in the first part of my assignment, thus my team and I have finished up ours and submitted a few days before the deadline. The day before it's due my friend calls me and asks for help after watching him in my workshop. I didn't feel like helping him and told him he should know what to do as everything was quite straightforward. He claims his team didn't do anything and he's doing all the work, at which point I snap and call him out on his bullshit. He realizes I had been watching him the whole time and tries to make excuses, but I'm tired, so hang up. At this point he realized he faked up, so starts participating a bit more in the following classes we don't talk as much, and I've gone back to helping him with exam prep as we had 2 exams in common. So we had this rich girl who came to our class for about half a year. She would constantly brag about her mum being a lawyer and her dad being a doctor, but the next day would change their careers to something completely different and talk about how much money they made. She was 100% self-centered and would literally take photos of herself while the teacher was talking to the class during lessons. One P.E. lesson the teacher was off sick and he had trusted us enough to sort of partner up and do some sort of physical activity. These 2 guys in my class decided to run a mini lesson of their own and somehow got everybody to do push-ups. Most people played along while others just sat around and enjoyed the atmosphere. This rich girl had not even attempted one push-up when she got up and loudly admitted that it was idiotic. My mate told her he was sure she could do at least 1 push-up, and she got all up in his face saying how her uncle would sue him for sexual harassment. Everybody was a bit confused and some of the guys were trying not to laugh. My mate stood up to her in front of the whole class and told her that she needed to get out of her own little world because nobody liked her and nobody ever would if she continued like this. Everybody then went to lunch and she sort of just stood there pouting. That next week we never saw her again. No clue if she learned her lesson, but a few people found a picture of her wearing barely anything on an obviously rented yacht with the caption being "Daddy just bought me this as a present," so we guessed not. I went to a small college, 5,000 undergrads. A guy that was a friend was from a well-off family and was considered good looking to boot. Freshman year you could see that he was trying, but the guy just wasn't really cut out for college. Towards the end of the second semester he kinda just shut down. He stopped going to classes and was always asleep. On the off chance he woke up, he'd already missed dinner 90% of the time, so he'd chug a pre-workout shake and go to the gym for hours, then go get sheet-faced at the shadiest party he could find. He smoked lots of weed, and I have the feeling was into pills too. Looking back, he was clearly depressed and lost in life. He'd developed this party guy stigma and no one really took him seriously. Funny thing is, I think he just came from an environment where he was always told exactly what to do and how to do it. When we had meetings, yes, we were in a fraternity, no, not Animal House, so keep your judgments to yourself. He was always there, dressed to the nines, was always attentive, and regularly had valid input. He never came back after the freshman year, and for the most part went incognito. A few guys still got a hold of him from time to time in the years that followed, but it was clear he was trying to forget that year and put it behind him. I saw him about 2 years ago at a wedding and spent pretty much the whole night just hanging out with him. Super chill about everything, but did kinda seem uncomfortable being around so many people from that time in his life. Pretty sure he'd moved back in with his parents and went to a local junior college, but he didn't talk much about anything like that. I still genuinely feel sorry for him. He just didn't get started well and couldn't get on track before it was too late. So my cousin is supposedly a tennis prodigy from Mexico, except he's arrogant as fuck, and he's been sheltered his whole life to believe he has natural born talent, except he's been trained to be good at tennis since he was a baby because his parents have more than enough resources. to pay for that sheet. And instead of going to school he's playing tennis. Now Mexico isn't exactly the hub for the world's greatest tennis players. Regardless though, it's still impressive that he's winning nationwide championships. Now he's come to the US in a boarding school, except he flunked out. Now he's going to some shorty high school barely getting passing grades. Still doesn't know how to speak English because he's 100% focused on tennis. But oh, there's thousands of better tennis players than him in his age range. He's not smart enough to realize it yet, but the Mexico tennis scene pales in comparison to the US's tennis competitive scene, meaning his future of becoming a sponsored famous athlete isn't going to be a career option for him. He's already begun to have a losing trend in his tennis games. In a vindictive way it does bring me some satisfaction, because he was always a spoiled beach. He used to cry because he didn't get the amount of money he wanted for his birthday as a teenager. And he'd spike tennis balls at me whenever I watched him play because his parents told me to go watch him. I had to go buy my own sheet for a while when I was young, when I went to live in Mexico for a semester and the kid stole my sheet pretending I didn't know it was him. He stole my food constantly, not because he didn't have any, but to bother me. So now that his life is falling to pieces it's cool, because it's karma in my eyes, but it's not something I actively care about, or even think about. The kid's irrelevant to me, and I don't care what happens to him, and I don't even want to feel joy from bad shit happening to him anymore, just because I feel like it's exercising the same type of immaturity he has. I come from a pretty nice and well-to-do area. The adults are wonderful and down to earth, but almost all of their kids are spoiled, and were doing one stupid thing or the other. There was one kid in particular, who always reminded me of a stereotypical 80s movie rich kid. He would always mention that his parents would give him whatever he wanted and let him do just about everything. I should point out that a few families also owned golf carts and would let their kids drive them. His family was one of those families. Well, one day he decides to take the cart and race around with a buddy of his. Eventually they decided to do tricks with it. Apparently they decide to slam on the gas pedal and do donuts. I don't fully remember how it happened, but next thing you know the golf cart flipped over, and the friend was nearly crushed to death. He had to be put in the hospital after a rib punctured his lung. I don't know how, but thankfully the kid survived. Our 80s rich boy was quite free, but still needed to process things I suppose. But don't worry, he perked up soon after. When his friend got out of the hospital 4 months later, 80s rich boy decided to throw a party at his friend's house. He brought fireworks, set them off inside the house. To his surprise the living room caught on fire. Thankfully the entire house didn't burn down. After hearing that story I never saw him again. I figured one of 3 things happened. He was sent to alternative school for being a dumb, as his parents had to move out of sheer embarrassment over their son nearly killing the same kid twice. His parents kill him. A girl I went to high school with was filthy rich. Her dad was some kind of coke kingpin, and they had more money than they knew what to do with. She was driving a military-style Hummer H1 in high school, and was too cool to talk to anyone like me. She was a grade A beach. Her parents didn't care that she threw ridiculous parties complete with complimentary drugs. A kid even died at one of their parties, and as far as I know, nothing really happened from a legal standpoint. Well, about 5 years after graduation the feds raided their house and dad went to jail. She unfortunately had to move to their summer home as most of their assets were seized. Their summer cottage is bigger and nicer than most upper middle class homes. One day I ran into her at work. She just got hired as a temp for like $8 an hour starting. I was in the whole lower middle management thing at the time. She sees me and gives me her life story. I had to listen because she reported to me and I was obligated to be nice. She was in her mid-late 20s with absolutely no work history, no car. She lost her license. She was giving blowers to this neck bearded gentleman who liked to say the word cuck a lot in exchange for rides to work. I'm not saying I took pleasure in her misfortune, but it's really crazy how the tables can turn so fast. I hear she got diagnosed with leukemia, but a reliable source tells me the GoFundMe is a fraud and she doesn't have leukemia. Who knows, life comes at you fast. Just for context, I live in North America. My family was quite wealthy, not Jeff Bezos wealthy of course, but equivalent to suburban owning a horse wealthy. The problem is my dad is retiring soon, and the cash flow is getting smaller and smaller. My brother always faked up his school all through high school to 2 previous attempts at undergraduate colleges. Yes, he dropped out twice from 2 different universities because he is basically a bum who never bothered to study, and he stole the tuition money from our parents. He's trying out a 3rd university now, quite low class with so-so accreditation, because that's the only one who would accept him, at the age of 26, which, of course, he is absolutely struggling to. Now he is also working long hours in a cafe, owned by his friend with a pay that is abysmally small, because he obviously needs work experience too for his CV/resume/whatever, assuming if he even ever bothered to make one. But even then, I don't think he realized yet that our parents' wealth is gonna run out soon, and that they are getting sick of him and considering completely cutting him off financially, leaving him behind with only that kind of education and job. The thing that made me sad is that he used to be a brilliant kid, straight as, skipping a year, winning competitions and all up to middle school, and, maybe, early high school. Maybe it's somehow our parents' fault who were pretty harsh and downright abusive, and it's only now the effect is showing up with how incapable he is of executive function and mentally take responsibility for his life. I always suggest going to the P and seeing psychiatrist for meds that might help him manage his life better, like I'm doing right now. But he just scoffs at me and says that's an evil thing to do, and the only medication he needs is prayer to God and a girlfriend who would love him and support him. I'm honestly worried about him, but I don't know what else to do to help him. My roommate freshman year in the dorms was from a wealthy suburb. I was a not wealthy first-gen student. I relied on financial aid. Her parents paid for everything. We got along okay, so I asked if she wanted to share an apartment the following year. She was enthusiastic at first, then got weird and avoidant when it came time to find a place. She finally told me her parents wouldn't allow her to live with someone on financial aid. She framed it like, "Can you believe my asshole parents?" That was my first experience with blatant classism. I didn't know how to respond, so we both pretended she'd never judge me like that and stayed friends. Fast forward to senior year. She asked me about the financial aid application process. Well, her parents finally admitted their lifestyle was heavily debt financed. The credit well had gone dry, and they could barely keep up with the payments, mostly due to serial entrepreneurial failure by her father. So, she needed to find her bootstraps. It was so delicious. I was the maid of honor at her wedding a few years later. She and her fiancé scrimped and paid for everything by themselves, holding it early on a Saturday morning to save money. A few months before the wedding, her parents revealed their big surprise wedding gift, an after party at their house, for which they were having a ridiculously expensive in-ground swimming pool installed. In Colorado, not the most practical. It finally dawned on her what shallow, selfish, appearance-obsessed assholes her parents were. I couldn't go to the after party. I told her I was in digestive distress from something I ate at the reception and couldn't make it. She decided she couldn't forgive me for missing it, conveniently, when it was her turn to be the maid of honor at my wedding. The cycle continues. I worked with a young woman I'll call Britley who came from a very wealthy old money South family. We were traveling for business, on a strict per diem, and she was in a snit over everything. Had to rent a car, an economy car no less, and not a full-time driver, to tote us around Atlanta. Snit. No hotel room service allowed? Do they expect us to starve? Can't expense a $200 bottle of wine at dinner? Snit. The thing is Britley could have just bought these things on her own dime, and she could well afford it. Her parents paid for her apartment, car, insurance, cell phone etc. She just couldn't expect our client to pay for it. But Britley refused and pouted and complained bitterly all week. We were ordering lunch in, and as a team, we took turns running out for food or coffee. It was Britley's turn and she refused. Like, flat out said, "No, I will not pick up anyone's lunch. That is not why I spent 4 years at Hoddity Toddy College." Like, honey, we all had the same education, but we all took turns picking up damn lunch for the team. It was not a hierarchy or a gender thing at all. The client caught wind of her piss poor attitude and complaining and asked her off the account. Like now. The thing is we still had 2 weeks on the client's site, so Britley was sent home early. At the end of our 3 weeks, the client was so thrilled with our work, they took us out to an amazing expensive dinner, a wine tasting, and gave all of us $200 gift cards to a spa for all of our hard work. By the time we returned to our home office, Brittler's desk was cleared out, and we never heard from her again. Out of morbid curiosity, I stalked her on Facebook, and she is married with 3 mini Brittlers and sells those monogrammed door signs with big bows. Edit. I almost forgot. The client took us on a tour of their factory and introduced us to some people who worked on the factory floor. Like, people who probably didn't make much more than minimum wage. One guy had been working this one machine for years, and he was clearly proud of himself. When we returned from the factory tour, she said, if I had to do that all day I'd literally kill myself. This is especially sheety of me, so I'm using my super secret alt account. My childhood best friend always had it good. Don't get me wrong, he worked hard and was hyper focused. However, he was never left wanting, and since his father sold the company his father founded, my friend gets $40,000 a year to help them reduce their taxes. Not once has my friend had to look in the face of poverty, ask whether or not he could afford something, or any of the questions many of us face. I love him dearly. He has done well taking full advantage of the opportunities in front of him, but also judges others for not doing similarly despite them not having the same situation he has. He went from top of his class in high school to UC Berkeley to a PhD at Stanford. He dropped out, just like I did from my school, with a manuscript, and then worked for his advisor's startup, which was pretty surely going to be acquired by Google. The past few had been too, which meant my friend would work at Google and get a big cut of the deal. He did, and on top of the crazy compensation, he was still getting at least $40K a year from his parents. He had never known failure, and it was so goddamn frustrating. His arrogance was worse. Then it all started falling apart. I didn't fully trust his wife in the first place, but I supported him and his decisions, and she wasn't totally terrible, just mostly. They got divorced. He lost his house. Left Google because he was miserable there. I've seen other situations where a totally obviously spoiled brat gets what they deserved, but for him, I really wanted him to see what the other side was like. In contrast, I spent my life struggling. I'm all too familiar with failure, and I may never have the money to buy a house. But I know how to bounce back. I know how to work harder and smarter than anyone around me. I can clean toilets and run engineering teams, found companies and volunteer at non-profits. I did in 8 years what took 16 for all of my peers, all K bachelor's education, and was working multiple jobs at the same time. He has a taste of my side of the fence, but I doubt he will ever know what it's like to be poor, to be humble, to be immensely grateful for any gift. During our finals at school, someone held a massive party on a Friday night. There was this one jackass whose parents owned a fortune. They would give him all the money to buy what he wants. The guy's parents were really nice people, easy to talk to and fun to hang with. Well, not their son. He thought that he was better than anyone and everyone around him. He would hit people just for the fun of it, and he would always find a way to make trouble. He also got caught forcing himself on 2 younger girls multiple times. On the night of the party, he came with his big fancy car, revving it and playing music so hard that I couldn't even hear myself thinking. He tried showing what a bad boy he is, and after a few minutes finally got out and went inside. I wanted to leave after he showed up, but my friend insisted I stay, so I did. He acted like the big shot of the party, which ruined it all. He and 3 of his friends got so drunk that they couldn't even walk in a straight line or even say a simple sentence, yet they tried to mess with everyone around them. After the party, when everyone started leaving, we found that his car got stolen. There were broken pieces of glass on the floor where he had parked. No one noticed it, or if they did, they probably didn't give a shit. The party was held in the backyard and there wasn't really space to park, so he had to park it on the corner of the street. His was the only one there, as everyone got dropped off by their parents or they walked. Most of us don't have the luxuries to buy a car. He had to call his parents to pick him up because they live almost on the edge of town and it was too far/dark to walk. His parents came to pick him up after a while, but his dad didn't want to hear any of it. He could see that his son was drunk. Poor kid got scolded in front of everyone before they drove off. We heard a few days later that his parents took all his belongings. This includes all of his money as a punishment for his cheat behavior, for getting drunk, and getting his car stolen. His ride was later found by the police, but his parents sold it as their son was clearly irresponsible. The next few weeks went on, and he complained about how his parents are unfair, and that he will get them back eventually, but I guess he didn't do anything. Now you can actually talk to him. He is no longer such a asshole, and he is slowly starting to get nicer to everyone. I guess he learned his lesson and now he's trying to become a better person bit by bit. I had a friend who started off as a coworker at a retail place. I was using retail to help pay for college, but he was using retail to have a job. His mom mandated that he have a job. His mom was the beneficiary of her father's wealth and found her own success in marrying rich men. She always bore a child before divorcing them and totally loved her kids with money. I always tried to help with his mom issues and always qualified our drinking with an end in sight. He laid back in mom's money and drank and gamed. Our friendship was a mess of him always trying to please his mother. His stepdad didn't matter. I kept telling his ass to plan ahead and do simple things like have a backup plan. He found a Vietnamese woman that would tolerate his lifestyle and have his child under the pretense of him having money. TLDR, his mom cut him off for dating an Asian. He lost his money mom and made a mom out of a Vietnamese woman that awaited the inheritance. 2 people got zapped in this one, but there's a child, so it's potentially really bad for that poor little guy. I was long gone before it went bad. He neglected his kid in front of me and let his girl at the time clean up for him. I told him it was time to straighten up and that we couldn't party anymore. He kept showing up at my house, drunk, driving. I had to cut it off. But I saw him working at Sam's Club about a year ago. I don't think he's getting mom's money quite yet. If so, good luck to him. He faking ruined a naive woman's life. It's just grimy all around. There are no good players in this story. I married one who got disowned from her family for marrying me. She grew up in the sort of family that gave each other Mercedes-Benzes and BMWs for Christmas. She was German and her dad was an engineer and her mom was a doctor. Her whole family had fancy high-end white-collar jobs. I grew up in the sort of family that gave each other hugs for Christmas. My dad was an alcoholic mechanic and my mom was a mom to 6 kids. My wife told me money doesn't matter. I told her the only people who have ever told me that were people who already had enough not to worry. Anyways, we get married despite our vast cultural and financial differences. So, one day, about 5 months into the marriage, I go to buy a tank of gas and my debit card gets declined. This is odd, as it's the payday when rent was due. Bills, yeah, but I still ought to have at least $600 in the bank. So I go to the bank. Bank says I'm $150 overdrawn. Impossible. I demand to see my bank statement. A few large charges to various German import companies. Okay, I think I know what happened. I drive home, furious, and ask my wife what the flying fuck she thought she was doing. She, puzzled, said that it was just $750 and that she failed to understand why I was being too unreasonably angry. She had ordered a bunch of her favorite German snack and comfort foods from a high-end rush order import company online, the sort that charges $350 for shipping and marks up all its products 40% because it caters to rich homesick clientele. I'm talking, like, by the time you average out the cost of shipping and the markup, a bag of currywurst flavored potato chips cost $75. So we were totally and truly ramen and crackers broke for a month until our next paycheck over about a dozen snack items, all because I married outside my class and she had no idea how devastating $600 going missing plus $150 in overdraft is to the average blue collar 25-year-old. Her box full of hilariously overpriced German junk food showed up and she couldn't eat them because she felt too guilty after seeing me failing to contain my rage and disbelief that our finances had been totaled and we had been nearly driven to the brink of eviction by my wife's financial illiteracy and a junk food craving. She adjusted to not being rich anymore. We have a daughter now and are getting ready to buy our first home. We have a mostly happy functional marriage. But yeah, she came from blue blood, and she once almost obliterated us financially because she got hungry and had my debit card info. Honestly, it hurts me when I read the comments here. I think the kids who are being called spoiled get so much anger and jealousy from other people. It's not the kids who are doing wrong, it's their parents who did not educate them properly. I grew up in a posh area, where PPL call it, went to an art school at 19 to figure out own life. I admit, that spoiled part of me didn't go anyway, because I was constantly lost, and didn't actually have much passion at art itself, but I desperately wanted to find my own voice. I moved away from my parents to a foreign country, was going through therapies, and I was totally lost, didn't belong to classmates, even some therapists took advantages of me, because I was that young spoiled child with money in the background looking for help. Also the professors didn't care about me even. I'm not saying that I'm perfect to be loved, but it seemed to me that they were offended of my background, and didn't understand what I was going through. People who wanted the revolution with art or activism bullied me in reverse because I was an evil for them. But that's what I meant by my heart, and if I were that evil, I wouldn't go to that art school even. Growing with really strict parents, it is really traumatizing. A lot of those authoritative jobs which people admire and ditch at the back, they are clever or brilliant in some ways to handle those jobs. But I feel like a lot of people get jealous because they can't get that much higher. But from my point of view, it is really not about getting higher. It's about the satisfaction in your own skin with people around you. It's about that happiness one finds in their own life. And happy people can find that happiness anywhere. And normally, high status people can't get out of that rank cycle because it is the pattern. Like me, a kid who wanted to meet other people, frankly, not me, but other people will block the barrier towards me because I look posh. People hate those with money and class, but be honest to yourself before ditching posh people in the back. Are you really not jealous of them? I saw quite a lot of people once they actually get the chance to be like one, they find their ambitions, which I found disappointing. That's what I think. I do believe that happiness doesn't come with money or class. It's just one's lifestyle. If you want that lifestyle, then work on it to get it. Don't blame others, especially kids. Some kid at my school was the person you would not want to meet as a guy because he was awfully rude and obnoxious to other boys, and he was super nice to girls. He was rich, had the latest iPhone, came to school in an expensive Uber every day. Taking an Uber to school was considered rich in my town, and he used Guxy school bags. He had built his harem around the girls in the level, and he chased away boys whose girlfriends were in our level. He would spend most of his time after school at the arcade hogging up the Japanese racing game. From what I've been told while ago, he was trying to cook in his home when the fire went out of control and his kitchen caught fire. Since he lived in a small bungalow, his house caught fire quickly. He didn't know what to do since he hadn't experienced distress like this in a long time. His dad was severely pissed and forced the kid to work in order to get the money to get a new house. While the family went somewhere else to stay, kid was seen as alien when he came to school all shaggy. He was being stared upon as he did not stride in with arrogance. I rarely saw girls with him from then on. Having to work probably seemed impossible for the kid, and he constantly complained about having to go to work after school, even if it was a part-time job. In the end, he was seen as a cribbaby. He had to come to school via public transport like everyone else, and he often hated riding the cramped bus. After losing his rich kid status and becoming a normal working kid, he carried on a while before committing suicide. Was on stage playing a gig and watching an obviously spoiled rich sheet get progressively more and more drunk and belligerent. He was waving his black card in the faces of every bartender and waitress and acting like he owned the place. Eventually, the owner had enough complaints that he instructed his bouncers to toss the guy out. He of course could not fathom being thrown out of a bar, so he decided to take a swing. The bouncer, who resembled a tree trunk with arms, Richie Rich, landed one punch square on the guy's jaw. It did absolutely nothing, like he had just been hit in the face with a marshmallow, and since he was just attacked, the bouncer decided to fight back. But he didn't throw a punch. He open face slapped the dude with such force the kid fell to the floor and passed out. The combination of the booze and the slap must have put him out cold. Last thing I remember was this kid being drug out along the floor by his feet while the girls he was with screeched about how they were going to sue. His dad was rich, etc. Nothing ever came of it, though guess he didn't want to tell his daddy that he got beach slapped so bad he passed out. Some kid I went to high school with owned a sucked up M3 that his parents bought him with upgrades. A year later, I got a job at Verizon and bought a Camaro. I kept in contact with friends from high school, and the news that I got a Camaro got to him. He challenged me to race, but I didn't know this at the time. He was under the impression I got an RSV6, not an SSV8, which is what I have. He adds me on Snapchat and tells me to meet at an airfield to race. This airfield is a small one used as a racing track because the airport there isn't in commission anymore, and there's no trespassing signs, and the pavement was nice. He's won races before, and he was talking shit to me when I got there, saying I got a V6, and instead of correcting him, I told him I'll pink slip. He took the offer. We raced, and I won, and it wasn't even close in the 3 laps. I got the keys to the car and took the title to the DMV the next day, sold the car within 2 weeks, and used the money toward my Camaro. For those wondering, everyone watching, many people from high school, was stunned, besides those who knew I'd win, because I actually had a V8. When he finished, he cried at the steering wheel for a solid 5 minutes knowing I'd relinquished the car from him. God, it felt so good to show that cocky punk who the fuck was boss. I don't know what he's up to today, but hey, all I know is he doesn't have a BMW anymore. TLDR, spoiled rich student pisses himself, sort of. When I was at university, my then girlfriend shared a house with a few other students. Leon had quite an entitled attitude and would expect the women of the house to do most of the cleaning and washing up. He'd get a fairly big allowance from his parents every 2 weeks and would spend a lot of it at the pub the day he got it. He wasn't well liked as the rest of the household all had student loans and part-time jobs and would struggle. His sexist attitude had been bothering the whole house for months. One day he got really drunk on mummy and daddy's money at the local bar. He'd been there all day instead of going to lectures, and when my girlfriend and I popped in that evening, he was being obnoxious and rude. He actually blew his nose on a £10 note and threw it on the floor laughing. Absolute faking prick. Leon got very drunk and couldn't make it home under his own steam. It was only a short walk, but I propped him up and got him back to his place. He was seriously out of it. Outside he started swearing loudly and was sick in the garden. He demanded my girlfriend clear it up, then passed out. I was faking livid at him. As he lay there snoring and muttering, in an instant I unzipped myself and pissed all over his trousers. He didn't flinch at all. My girlfriend was in hysterics. We then dragged him inside and left him in his room, covered in piss with bits of grass stuck all over him. Apparently he stayed in his room for 2 days, but would pop out for the bathroom, so housemates knew he was alive. Later that week he came up to me on campus and said he'd heard I got him home. He apologized for being an asshole and said he was so embarrassed at how out of it he'd been, and he was ashamed that he'd wet himself and that he'd made up his mind to pull his socks up and sort himself out. My girlfriend moved in with me soon after. Later we heard Leon had reined it in and tried hard at his degree. Don't know what he made of his life, but Leon, if you're out there and if you now realize it wasn't your own piss, don't go back to your old ways, mate. Total bragging moment, but boy was it satisfying. This was when I was in 5th grade, mid-90s, and not as epic as the other stories in this thread, but boy did that rich kid get put in his place. There was a kid in my elementary school whose parents were super rich, owned a few jewelry stores. His folks were nice, but he and his brother were total spoiled brats. They had huge birthday parties with magicians, animals, the works. They even had a security camera system put in their tree house to keep the uncool kids out. I'd always get invited to their parties. My parents knew their parents, but as the quiet chubby kid I'd get picked on all the time, told I didn't belong, was too poor to be at the party, everything. He'd even hit me or throw things at me just for fun. He'd laugh and say, "My dad will sue you if you hit me back. You won't do anything, you're such a punk." Well, one day in 5th grade, I was done with that shit. He'd been throwing pencils at me from the row behind me all morning, and at lunch he took my cookie, homemade from my mom, and smashed it. I saw complete red and ran after him all the way across the soccer field, basketball court and tackled him to the ground right by the tetherball poles. Remember how I was a chubby kid? I wasn't athletic, but I had about 20 pounds on him. I knocked the wind out of him so hard he couldn't cry for what felt like 15 minutes. I was afraid I killed him. Not only did he never pick on me again, but his mom gave me a huge ice cream sundae at the next party at his house for being such a good influence. One of my best friends from high school was pretty much born with a silver spoon in his hand. He lived in a gated community. His dad was very well off from an executive position at a major company, and I believe his mom was born into money. Just to highlight this, his parents bought him his first car. When he got into an accident, his fault, they bought him another car. After that car was totaled in another accident, not his fault. This time, they gave him his mom's BMW 5 Series. Once he graduated college, they put a down payment on a house for him, and his dad got him a job at his company, a position completely outside his degree field. At one point, he had almost $100K in savings. I saw his bank statements laying around, and bought a BMW 1 Series, because the 5 Series used too much gas. He kept the 5 Series, though. Then he got fired. Not laid off, not quit, fired. His story was that his coworkers just didn't like him, so they went 2 hours and claimed my friend was going to come back to work with a gun. He doesn't own a gun, but whatever his savings lasted him almost a year, but he finally got a much lower paying job, part-time, at another company doing something similar to what he did previously. It took him almost 2 years to go full-time, and last I heard, he was doing better. Okay, this is one I can add to points. So for context, a rich American boy had moved into Singapore with his family, and his parents decided not to make him go to a posh school or something, but rather my local school. Some of the story will have missing parts, because this was last year. I don't have the best memory points, so at the beginning, he was a cool kid, letting us kids play with his expensive toys after school and such, but one day he gets careless and drops the toys in school. When the teacher confiscated them, he had the biggest tantrum I had ever seen. And after that every day he would have this grumpy mood towards teacher and always was being rude to them, like shouting in class, "I can get you fired," if they ever scolded him and such. Now one thing you should know is that he had this terrible habit of spitting randomly everywhere. So one day he decides to yet again spit randomly somewhere when all of a sudden everyone goes quiet. He had accidentally spit on the principal. God, you should have seen how mad she was after he spit in her best dress, because later the Minister of Education would swing by and wanted to look her best, and there the spit was on her dress with bubbles trickling down the flower pattern. He decides to run away from the teacher and altogether escaped school. Long story short, he got suspended for a week for being disrespectful to the teachers as well as spitting on the principal and everywhere in school, as well as leaving school without consent. He isn't this spoiled anymore, but here and there he makes a scene, like when he got kicked out of the ceramics club because he only ever threw around the clay-like toys and smashed others' works there. When I was in Air Force basic training, Danish Air Force, we had one kid who was clearly very spoiled at home. I don't know why he signed up, but I do know everyone in my company was a volunteer, because I got the 5th last spot 1.5 years before training started, so he must have had his reasons. On our first practice operation out in the field, we had to set up a base of operations area where you sheet into a plastic bag on a tiny toilet, eat field rations, which are dehydrated foods, and powdered dinners, etc. And on the first morning our sergeants had the morning watch guy run around and wake everyone up 2 hours earlier than we had been told. The guy complained and whined the whole time, especially during his guard shift during the night, and when he woke he very loudly complained about being woken early and about the particular sergeants we had with us, which could be very easily heard since we were in a quiet forest. At morning briefing the sergeants said they'd heard all his complaints, but didn't single him out, saying that if they heard anything like it again the person would be severely punished, and the sergeants were irritable for the rest of the day. I looked over at this kid, and he had the grimmest look I've ever seen on anyone's face. He looked faking horrified. Didn't help much though. Later in the day he forgot his R on the ground while going off to eat lunch, which is the military's #1 no-no. Same sergeant he complained about ran down the road, climbed a 10-meter tree, and tied the gun to the top. Then came back and told us all to get into plank until this one particular private managed to find and recover his gun and make it back to us. After about half an hour he did. Then we were all made to run about 150 meters away and do constant lunges while he did a tactical crawl towards us. Needless to say, nobody in our company was very impressed with him for a few days. This happened a long time ago, so I might state some stuff wrongly. I had double checked it however, so it should be fine. Point: in my former high school class there was this spoiled rich kid. Let's call her Gwyneth. That brat would spend her 5-6k monthly allowance buying designer bags, Rolex watches, Porsche cars, yachts, and parties. Not only that, she often spent too much money. In 1 month she'll come up to me and ask for food. Once I offered her a Subway sandwich, since at that time I didn't really bother making my own sandwiches, and she was like, "Ooh no, do you have any bento or sushi?" A bento is a traditional Japanese box packed with food. Like, excuse me, do you think I can buy sushi for myself every day? Also, sushi in my area is hella expensive, since my area has less than 2% of the population that are Asians, and only one of them know how to make sushi that tastes good. It's like more than $12 for some sushi. Not gonna lie, it tastes superb though. One day during school Gwyneth came to school late with her MacBook ruined and was crying/screaming. Everyone was asking her what happened, and she shrieked something along the lines of, "My dad isn't even giving me an allowance anymore." After that I had a sudden love of democracy as everyone clapped. I guess nobody liked her from the start. Even her friends that were previously with her suddenly disappeared. I swear I think I saw one of her friend clapping also, but that was a long time ago, so that part I'm not that sure. So, there's this girl that is in my college class, Microeconomics 102, and she's constantly late to class and never submits her projects online. Honestly, I'm not really that concerned with her, but I got to know her because we were in a project together and we made a group chat. Anyhow, we met up at this restaurant to talk. Yeah, I know, regular schmegular stuff. She tells me that her father is a doctor and mother a judge. If you didn't get the gist already, they get big bucks. I'm over here shook and ask her, "Why don't you try?" She's like, "I'm failing but I don't care. My parents just wanted me to do something, so I did." That's what she said, or along the lines of it. I'm honestly just like, well, that's typical rich beach sheet. She was just stuck up by the way and didn't contribute to anything. I swear to God, I didn't wish on anything on her. I didn't want anything bad to happen to her. I was honestly just here minding my own beeswax. Anyways, not even like a month later, she said that her mom lost her job and her father recently had cut ties off of her immediately after. She starts crying and spilling everything to us because she claims that she doesn't have real friends. Keep in mind that we barely interacted with her. We were just working on the project for 2 weeks and it was already over. At this point, I'm empathizing with her because I just feel compelled to. A week later all that shit happened. She dropped out of the school. I don't know where she is now, but I just hope that she's good and not out there selling herself or doing drugs or anything of that sort. I have 2 points. So I'm in a small town, so there is a bit of a gap between the well-off people and those who aren't doing so well. I fit into the latter category. There is this girl and she came from the first category. She had her own car, had an iPhone, always the latest model, name brand clothing. She was part of the in crowd at school, and one thing that you could definitely tell was she pretty much got anything she wanted if she either A, begged her parents enough, or B, bullied someone enough for it. Now this bitch has this annoying as pet Rottweiler mix she is always letting off lead to run and cause havoc. One day it goes missing. A month or so later the local pound posts that the most amazing thing happened. They had a show for some of their dogs in care, and one of them ran straight towards her actual owner. Isn't that great? All the owner had to do was come to the shelter, claim their dog officially, sign some paperwork, and pay a small fee. It had been in custody for a while, mind you, so it's for its expenses. I think you can guess who the dog belonged to, and an even longer time than the dog had been missing the first time she throws a fit over Facebook, because after so long of the dog not being claimed it was seen on a pet finder website, and had been shipped off to its new owner who'd already paid its rehoming fee, and passed an inspection. The dog was now going to live its life in New Jersey, and that beach was having none of it. Now a normal person would be sad, but no, not her. She literally led a cyberbully campaign against the damn shelter. It literally only ended after the pound posted evidence of all the calls and letter that she had received, and honestly she still tried for a while. My roommates crying because they got told to do dishes, and getting mad at me when she caught me cleaning her dishes. Like seriously, house owner wasn't even mad, but they just started yelling and crying. I hate those two, and I'm fairly certain they are now faking with my sheet out of retaliation. TLDR, I wasn't a beach, but college woke me up to our means. Growing up, I never would have considered myself spoiled. Spoiled kids were mean and entitled and terrible people in general. Honestly, I was just too shy and quiet to fit that. My parents both grew up in poverty, frequently not having food on the table or very little of it. Both of them also worked full-time jobs while doing full-time college. They became accountants and had very successful careers before having my sister and I, so we grew up in upper middle class life. We each had 2 to 3 fairly expensive activities at a time, and I had a violin set that was worth about 6k total. When I went to college, my parents paid for it in full, and my mom's parents put away 20k for each of us on graduation. My mom's father became a renowned scientist in middle age. I knew the latter was extremely generous, but student loans weren't something that ever really crossed my mind. Reality hit when I made friends in college, finally coming out of my shell. All of them were in debt even with financial aid, and most of them also had a job to help make ends meet. I was shocked, and honestly a bit sheepish, that I was so well off in comparison. In my sophomore year, reality hit again, when I moved to apartment-style dorms. 4-bed, 4-bath with kitchen, and living room still on campus, and was compiling monthly expenses to evaluate if we needed to raise my monthly allowance. I put down weekly soda as I think the third item, and my parents at that point, I think, realized just how different I could afford to look at college from how they did. They still funded everything, but those first 2 years were also a rude awakening to needing to budget, spend responsibly, etc. I help out my friends when I can, and, since my love language is giving gifts, I like to pay them a bit extra with things like D&D items. My first DM has a third printer for minis, gift cards to their favorite restaurant, things like that. Mine was not only a spoiled brat, but also a ultra racist bully, and still is. He is racist towards everyone who was a different race than him. He was Albanian, and what's worse is that our school is mostly made out of exchange students from other countries. Nobody liked him, and his only friends were other bullies. Have an example, at the end of the 6th grade, while we were in the art class, he pushed the chair away from my Arabic friend. He hit his head over. It did not bleed, but it obviously hurt a lot. While everyone was trying to help, he did a heroic pose. In his own defense, he was carrying a bomb and was about to blast himself. When he was sent to the office, he got suspended for a whole week. When he learned he was being punished instead of being awarded, he threw the most 3-year-oldish temper tantrum in front of everyone. 2 weeks before the online classes, he then threatened me to go back to my country because I was Asian and probably have the coronavirus. I did the right thing and told the principal he was going to detonation for a whole week. On the 2nd month of 7th grade, we were going to trip to Albania. While we were going, he ate nothing but junk food. At the middle of the road, he threw a temper tantrum because he finished his 3 packs of chips and has no more. We did not stop to get him more chips, of course, so he continued his unholy screech for 4 hours. One of my Christian friends literally splashed holy water on him. Everybody, including me, was praying for him to stop. He was no longer allowed to go to field trips. On December we had Secret Santa, and I had him. I bought him a really high quality headphones. He again threw a temper tantrum in front of the whole class. and he always stayed the same. Teachers always gave him detentions and suspensions, but he always stayed the same, until one day, we learned that his father finally decided to punish him by selling all of his electronics and games sold, except a Dell laptop for his schoolwork, and if he wanted to buy any of them, he would have to work for every cent himself. So, I grew up with a single parent who started very poor and then, in my teens, became very rich, and then life hit us hard when I started to go to college. It's a very long, very traumatic story, but it supplements any semblance of a spoiled rich kid I had in me after about freshman year. As I went through these terrible things, my closest friend from high school really showed me what a spoiled rich kid looked like. I started to notice a lot of really messed up stuff he would do. I'm not even sure where to start. For starters, he was a really smart kid that went to a really big university for aerospace engineering. He soon gets kicked out and starts going to community college for psychology, which dwindles down to him going part-time, and then he starts taking one class a semester because he can't even handle registering. Meanwhile, I'm having to manage full-time college, a part-time job, serious financial problems, a death in the family, a massive family feud, and a lot of other stuff. We started a Minecraft server. At first it was sort of an ironic thing in high school, but we had a lot of fun and kept it going for years. As we played, and I started venting and confiding in my friends all the stuff happening in my life, and he would sit there and insult my family and tell me how I lack the ability to cope with stress. Then him and another friend started teasing me on Minecraft. They would use codes to teleport me random places constantly and kill me off and ban me because it was funny. But then it got to the point that I couldn't even play the game without getting harassed. At one point I tried to get back at him in a silly way. I burned down the building he'd been working on. He still rages about it, and he proceeded to make a jail for me out of bedrock. Which means me, the only person in the server who isn't on creative/god mode, because I can't be trusted, cannot escape. Normally, I'd just stop playing, but I was in a really messed up place at this time, and they were my only friends, and I was desperate for human interaction. A mutual friend of ours one time watched him do this, and she said it was getting to be a bit much, and she said he turned to her and said, "He deserves it." But this was the theme of our friendship and his relationship with others. He was very subtle about it, but he would often try to set himself up as everyone's superior. He had to be in control, and would even freak out if the wrong friends hung out, because he didn't like his friend groups mingling. We never knew why, and when everyone would overrule him, he would mope about how he wanted to spend time with us in said groups rather than everyone get together, unless it was his apartment. Now, his apartment is another story. Even though he would lecture us on how family is an archaic construct, he also said his parents had a moral obligation to care for his every want and need until he is ready to move on. His parents got a divorce recently, and his dad, who paid for everything, said it was time to grow up and told him to get a job or he wouldn't pay for his apartment. He never got a job. He moved in with his dad. Still never got a job. Dad kicked him out, and he moved in with his mom. They have a really bad relationship. Still refuses to get a job. While this is going on, he falls in love with a prostitute. She tries to break it off with him, so the only natural response is to save her from her pimp/boyfriend. The pimp/boyfriend does not like this idea and tries to chase them down in his car. So he takes her to his mom's house, where she then finally cuts ties with him and goes back to the pimp/boyfriend. Around this time, I finally blew my lid with him over something very small, and we stopped talking. The last thing I heard was that either the pimp/boyfriend got arrested or she did, but whoever did gave up their phone, and he was freaking out about it. Just to add one more thing, while I'm wallowing in salt, the last time I saw him in person, I came in from out of state with my mom. She had some business to do, and I tagged along to see my friends. Homeless was determined to spend as much time as possible with me, but he needed a pair of white skinny jeans for some reason. We go to the mall. He can't find them in Brooks Brothers or Neiman Marcus, so I say, why not Gap or Old Navy? As we pass them, they totally have it. He scoffs at me and flat out says no. Like he wouldn't be caught dead in that trash. We leave. My mom calls and says to meet her. He goes on a rant about how much of a beach my mom is as he is dropping me off. Not really a rich kid, but his dad was president of the local UAW, so he thought he was royalty. Point guy is a complete sociopath his entire life. Like hang out with some creepy 40-year-old burnout that sells high school kids acid and then rat him out to the cops when even that guy gets sick of him and acts like he was a victim. Stealing anything that isn't nailed down. Telling people don't you know who my father is. General douchebaggery. After faking around for the entirety of his 20s he goes to law school. Daddy isn't worth much except for political connections in our upstate New York Rust Belt city, so he cashes in all of his accumulated favors to land his son an assistant DA position right out of law school. Point less than a year in the kid has a disagreement with his female supervisor, has a couple of drinks, and then sends a group text to the entire department calling her a cunt. Wakes up to a sheetload of messages demanding he come in immediately on his day off. The tenured DA, who's a close personal friend of his father, fires him personally, and he packs up his desk and leaves. You would think that would inspire just a glimmer of humility. You'd be wrong. He immediately declares that the job was a dead end, and he was looking to get out. In fact, it's the best possible outcome. Daddy sets him up in a tiny office as a public defender. He even manages to partner with a prestigious local defense attorney, but that guy drops him a couple months later. Then he's stalking his ex-girlfriend and finds out she's dating a sheriff's deputy. He gets the guy's contact info and threatens his job, saying I could use my friends in the DA's office to royally fuck up your career. The guy doesn't know how full of shit he is and breaks up with her. Now she's terrified and wondering when the next shoe is gonna. My uncle was super wealthy and spoiled his son rotten. Cousin never had to lift a finger to achieve anything in his life. Uncle paid for him to attend a fancy private school, then bought him a place in university. Third world country here, it is very common. Then used his influence to find him a job. Cousin spent most of his life drinking, getting into small scrapes with the law, which his dad always made sure he got out of. Over the last few years his dad's health has deteriorated. He is now bedbound and needs a nurse 24/7. Cousin has quit his job over half a year ago because he felt they weren't paying him enough. It was a pretty well paying job for someone with no work experience. He spent the last half a year drinking full time and gaming. Now the money has run out as uncle wasn't saving anything either. Cousin has let the cable get turned off, so now his dad is stuck on his bed with nothing to do but stare at the ceiling. Electricity and water hasn't been paid in months. He has repeatedly asked the nurse to wait several days for her pay. Cousin is now asking his dad's ex-secretary to help him sell off some assets so they have money to pay for electricity, etc. He can't do anything for himself. Has asked the secretary to sort out a job for him. She doesn't even work for them anymore and is just helping out because she knows them and has little to no real life skills. He doesn't even know how to find the cheapest place to buy his dad some adult diapers. He was saying that he wants the secretary to pay a guy to compare prices of adult diapers for him so he can choose the cheapest option. Oh, and any money he makes from selling things off goes straight to drink again. He is very defensive and is always suspicious of people trying to take his dad's wealth, so the rest of the family have just been leaving him to his own devices. A man had two sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later this younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all his money in wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him. But no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, "At home even the hired servants had food enough to spare, and here I'm dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant." So he returned home to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son." But his father said to the servants, "Quick, bring the finest robe in the house, and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet. And kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead, and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found." So the party began. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house, and he asked one of the servants what was going on. "Your brother is back," he was told. "And your father has killed the fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return." The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, "All these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to, and in all that time you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back, after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf." His father said to him, "Look, dear son, you have always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found." Luke 15:11-32 NLT